Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Mormon Stories Podcast. I am your host, Sean DeLynn. It is November 1st, 2022, and we are here in part two of what I think is a really important, powerful, and inspiring Mormon story with Amanda and Shaye Scott. Hey, guys.
Hi.
Welcome back. How was lunch?
It was great.
Wonderful.
Today's lunch was brought to you by Harmon's. No. And Margie, you're here joining us. Hey, Margie.
Hi there.
Thanks for being here.
Yes.
We just finished part one, almost a 3-hour episode with Amanda and Shaye. Shaye talked about growing up Mormon in the St. George area and loving a lot about his Mormon experience as the one of 9 or 10 children in an Orthodox Mormon family. Shaye shared with us his experience growing up as a Mormon, assigned male at birth, experiencing gender dysphoria and what that was like. He also talked about going on his mission to Ohio and meeting Amanda when they were in high school. Amanda also was raised in the St. George area. She talked a lot about her Mormon upbringing with a mom who worked outside the home, but also where she learned a lot about people-pleasing and perfectionism as a young Mormon woman, specifically focusing on the performing arts and singing and music. And she moved into literature when she got to BYU. But where we left off, they had, I guess Shaye had gotten home from his mission. They got married when Amanda was, 19, and Shaye was 21, 22, something like that. And and they were starting their early marriage, and that's kind of where we left off. So today we're going to be talking about Shaye's, gender dysphoria and how that progresses into their marriage. And after, we're going to be talking about Amanda's career, ultimately becoming a professor of English literature and what it was like to work at BYU, Idaho, when you no longer had a temple recommend. We're going to be talking about their faith journey and questioning and doubting Mormonism, and also their professions. Specifically, we mentioned that Shaye was one of the founders, at least as sort of an executive producer, with the Piano Guys and their YouTube channel. And he's, if you've seen any of those awesome Piano Guys videos, Shaye's been a part of that. Of course, Amanda's career we're going to talk about as well. So we've got a lot of great stuff to talk about today. So let's just jump right back into it. Where we left off, you guys were married and doing the Mormon thing.
Yep. Little babies.
We're going to be talking about fertility and infertility and in vitro stuff too. So why don't we should we start with career stuff maybe?
Sure.
Yeah. So you get back from your mission and Amanda was at BYU. How did your education / careers progress?
So Amanda was at BYU, but then decided to move back.
Yep.
To St. George?
Yep. We moved back to St. George. And then after coming back, I think we met up at your parents' house, and I think we talked all night, and then we were engaged by morning. So
Just like the normal Mormon way. Pretty much.
So.
One thing you were asking us in part one, John, was about our plans, like going into marriage. And I just remember being like, well, we know we're supposed to get married. So we got married, and it was sort of like, what is it they say? No purser script. We were like, okay, now we're going to figure out the rest of our lives together, which was a beautiful thing in a lot of ways. Yeah.
Yeah. I was attending, it was Dixie State University at the time. Was that? Yeah. I was attending college there. Amanda was, you were furthering your schooling as well. And that was one thing there was a lot of pressure on, because of course I'm looking at anyone who's high up in the church. And for the most part, most of them are often, highly educated or have done something so profound. And so I thought like, I got a degree in something that's important. So it was really hard for me going to college, trying to figure out what I wanted to do.
I guess we should, for those who didn't watch part one, just pause this and go watch part one. A major theme of last episode was what I call the tyranny of Shaye's Patriarchal Blessing, because you would have heard in part one how you were promised to sit at the highest councils of the church, how your family found out about that, and then how you just lived through your mission and your adult years with all these heavy expectations that you ended up, I guess, putting on yourself, but the church and the blessing put it on you. But then your pressure for yourself and your family's pressure for yourself was just always a constant theme of almost intellectual, psychological oppression.
My lived experience was that everything I was doing was shaping me for this mission I had to fulfill. So, of course, education falls into that, right? Growing up during the Gordon B. Hinckley generation, it seems like they're always talking about getting an education. It was like almost like getting your Eagle Scout was being important in the 90s, you know? So I just remember telling Amanda, like, it's so hard, like, I don't even know what steps to take next that would be in alignment with what I like to do.
So you kind of stopped going to Dixie. Is that right?
Yeah, I stopped going. I was dabbling in marketing. I had bought a camera that I used to make home videos growing up all the time. And I talked to Amanda into like, hey, if we buy this camera, you know, maybe I could film wedding videos with this. And
what was the camera?
It was a Canon 5D Mark II. I can't remember what it was, but this is like during the time where you're starting to see DSLRs pop up and you can make them look like movies. And I just thought, I'm like, I want to do that. I had a friend who created all these weddings at the Salt Lake Temple, and I thought I could do that. And so, yeah, I bought this camera, and I remember I started to explore and trying different things with it. And I remember my father-in-law was getting surprised with this new dream car that he always wanted to have. I had this idea of filming it like a commercial, and so, you know, he shows up Christmas morning, the garage door opens, and then you see this new car that he had always wanted. So anyway, I filmed it like in a really cinematic way with the music, and you see his expression and just being shocked. And I ended up putting that on YouTube, and then all of a sudden it started getting all these views. And this is back in 2009, I believe, and so it's
pretty early.
Yeah,
YouTube's
it was new.
Kind of a baby.
Yeah. So it was like all of a sudden we got all these comments, and then Audi, which was the car he got, reached out to me and said, "Hey, we want to use this for our social media. Can we post this?" And of course, I'm just like, "No way, this is crazy," you know. And so they posted it, and then a friend of mine who owned a piano store in southern Utah reached out to me, and he says, "Hey, John Schmidt, the piano player, he comes down to my store. We've been doing stuff with him, and he goes, I think this would be a really cool idea is to film him, and maybe this would sell more pianos." And like it just sounded fun, right? You're taking this medium that hadn't really been explored a lot on YouTube and showing a professional pianist playing and putting that on YouTube in a professional way, right? What we deemed professional at that time.
For those who don't know, John Schmidt is a famous Mormon pianist?
Yes. Yep.
Probably world famous?
Known more. Yeah, definitely now with the piano guys. So.
Like a George Winston, maybe before the piano guys. Was he kind of like a George Winston type, or?
He was very known in Utah. There's that song "Waterfall" a lot of people know, and so do you want me to go into the story of piano guys? Okay, sure. So I go to his piano store, and there's 6 of us at the time, and a few of us were in the filming side, and the others were more into the music production, creating the music. And Steven Sharp Nelson's the cellist. We finally did a music video called "Michael Meets Mozart." Is that right? Gosh,
yeah, Michael Meets Mozart.
And that was the first video that just really took off, and that kind of solidified what we then called the piano guys.
What was it called again?
Michael Meets Mozart.
It was like a Michael Jackson Mozart mashup, right?
Yeah,
it was a long time ago.
And I think that's the first video we had that broke 1 million, if I recall. And it was just like, holy cow, this is crazy. And
back then, 1 million views was a lot.
Yeah,
right. Yeah, and then to have something coming out of Utah getting 1 million views, that was kind of a big deal for the rest of us.
That was newsworthy, right? That was
it was.
You would see on KSL or something like that.
It was viral.
Sure. Yes.
Yeah, that's what we called viral back in the day.
Everything was viral.
Yeah.
Yeah. And now you got TikTok and people get 1 million just filming their dog.
Anything.
But it's crazy. So anyways, that kind of created this group called the Piano Guys. I was more on the filming side of it and filming, editing. My formal title was executive producer, and there was a few other of us as well that were involved in different aspects. But that was a very pivotal part of my life because it felt like for the first time since maybe my mission, like all of a sudden I could see this purpose. And here we're doing something that, you know, it was a very faith-based group. You know, all of us are members of the church, and we would say prayers before every every video shoot. And
Really?
yeah, very much.
And very sincere.
Very sincere.
Spiritual people for sure.
Yes, definitely.
So wait, so it's a bunch of Mormon guys who are into music and making music videos praying that what would happen?
You know, as you'd probably imagine, that the music would, you know, touch the hearts of others and
bring them to Christ.
Sure.
Bring them to the church.
Yeah. And the way that you would expect to, as a faithful member, you would think you want people to experience the light of Christ, the love, and you know, in many ways, I think it really did do that. I don't maybe use the same terminology, but it really, music, as you know, can be very healing and very impactful. So the cause was beautiful in many ways. But yeah, so as we started to expand, we started to do bigger, more grandiose videos, and had some really cool experiences and doing the wonders of the world, filming all 7 wonders of the world. We haven't done all of them, but going to Chichen Itza. I remember a cool experience where I was really sick. That's not cool. The food,
food poisoning,
the food poisoning wasn't fun, but getting a blessing and then feeling sustained and feeling like I could continue the work. And that was amazing. And so there was many experiences like that where I viewed it as like, yeah, this is the most important thing I could be doing. And like I said before, I think those things still have meaning to me, certainly. So,
well, the Piano Guys, I'm looking at the YouTube channel. It's got 7 million subscribers.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And that's big on any level. That's massive.
Yeah. And how many billion views?
2.2 billion-ish,
probably
more views.
Billion with the B.
Yes. Yeah, some of the videos, I think, reached 100 million. So it was crazy. And actually, Amanda, early on when we were filming, we did a Adele Hello.
Not Hello.
What is it?
Rolling in the Deep.
Rolling in the Deep. That's right. Amanda did a vocal version where she performed with them and sang, and so that was really cool.
I want to see that.
It was pretty crazy. Very early on, you know, they worked with amazing vocalists. I was just in the right place at the right time.
She's being humble.
You can be an amazing vocalist.
Yeah. It was really fun. It was so fun.
That's amazing.
Well, okay, so yeah, not many people can say they've been a part of creating content that's been viewed by billions. That's amazing.
Yeah.
And it's stunning. I mean, stunning videos with like incredible views. Really.
Great. It's great music.
Highly artistic.
Yeah, it's great music. It's great entertainment. And then it's great production value.
Mm-hmm.
It's good stuff.
Yeah. There's been a few of the concerts we've gone to in the, I always get the name wrong, Vivint Arena?
Vivint Arena?
Uh-huh.
Yeah. Keeps changing the name. And, you know, the arena's full of people, and John and Steve are up there performing, and the video is on like a big like mega screen behind it. And I've just been sitting there going, wow. Like just remembering Shaye editing that and then working with Paul Anderson and you guys, you know, editing all this stuff, and this arena full of people that's watching it. So that's something to be really, really proud of.
Yeah. I mean, I think it was a beautiful collaboration of people that had a skill set in certain areas that made the whole group work, for sure.
And so you've been involved with Piano Guys for how many years?
Since the beginning, 2010. So
that's 12 years.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's crazy.
And I don't know, like YouTube has gotten so influential. It seems like some of those Piano Guys videos were some of the first in my memory to really go viral and hit it big, right? I mean, you were part of a early wave as one of the biggest YouTube producers at the time. Is that right?
Yeah, it was neat because we went to I think it's called VidCon. It's like the YouTube.
VidCon?
Yeah, YouTube's big thing. And at that time, there's just a small group of people. It was certainly something new at the time that was never really being done in the way that we were doing it, by putting a piano in the middle of nowhere and trying to film it professionally and trying to professionally produce music. You know, it was just such an unusual thing to see on the internet, because before that you saw people filming silly cat videos and or just like really funny, you know, stuff. So
that's great. And it's great, Amanda, you were able to be a part of it a little bit.
It's fun. And it being a part of that group, they really are such great people. It kind of felt like a family in a way, you know, like I had a bunch of big brothers or something that they're just very warm, welcoming people. Mm-hmm. I think Al's the only one we didn't mention directly, but yeah, they're great. So that was a really faith promoting experience that I think we still look on as something we're grateful to have been a part of.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. That's great. Okay, so how's your career progressing at this time, Amanda, while he's doing cool video stuff and YouTube stuff?
Yeah, so this is kind of where our story intersects the whole like education journey and infertility, because they're very much intertwined. I just remember probably within 6 months of getting married, I feel like I can't say exactly why this was the case, but I just remember thinking, okay, like we need to have children soon. And I felt very spiritually inclined to that as well. I felt prompted, like we need to have kids like now. And there was just urgency. And thinking back, I'm like, I was 19 years old. But I just felt like the clock's ticking, man. Like we got to start having kids right now. Like these spirits.
You're seeing people around you having kids.
That's
too.
true.
Yeah.
By now, my friends are all getting married in their early 20s, and people are having kids, and I'm just feeling this urgency, but it's not working out. And so, of course, right away, doesn't even take long at all. Like within 6 months, I'm depressed. I'm stressed out. I'm like, well, what is going on? This should be working. And which medically, if you know, a year is totally normal for a couple to try to get pregnant. I was stressed out like literally from day one about it. And I was done with my bachelor's degree. And so then I thought, okay, I'll just go on and get my master's degree. And I mean, for sure, by the time I'm done with my master's, we'll have a baby. Like, you know, so I'll get my master's, great. So I got my master's in English, finished that, still no pregnancy. And by then, for women who've gone through this, it's so frustrating because you're going to all these doctors and they're kind of looking at you like, I don't know what to do for you. And it's just a lot of guesswork. But I had a bunch of surgeries early on and figured out that I have endometriosis, which if you know anything about endometriosis, it is very painful and it's progressive. So the longer you go without getting pregnant, the worse your symptoms become. We're talking like abdominal pain. That's the biggest thing, right? Just like a lot of pain. So doctors were telling me, don't worry, it'll be fine as long as you get pregnant soon. So then the clock's really ticking and I'm thinking, oh my gosh. So let's think. So then like that would be 3 years had gone by then. And I had one like early miscarriage, but nothing else. And by then we realized, okay, we're probably going to have to really seek out, fertility. And it was something that I couldn't imagine like going into debt for. I thought like, oh my goodness, if we go into debt for it and we don't get pregnant, then I'll really, the stress will even be greater. So we just kind of kept working towards that. And I thought, well, I guess I'll start my doctorate. I don't know what else to do. Like, I just need something to do. And I loved school. I really loved it. I loved the structure of it so much. And so I started commuting to Las Vegas from St. George. And I was still teaching all this time. So I started teaching college when I was 21, which was weird because I would have, return missionaries I went to high school with stumble into my classroom and go like, what's going on? It was a little strange to teach basically people my own age.
It was on brand for your overachieving self.
True. It was, anyway, it was weird.
Perfectionistic, performance equals worth self. You were
I was just all business. I was like, I know I'm your same age, but I am your professor. But I'm much less that way now. But I went to UNLV. That was a great experience. And that was like the first time I'd really been out of the Mormon bubble because I'd pretty much been in St. George my whole life, been at BYU, which clearly a Mormon bubble. And at UNLV, everything about the culture just shocked me. I felt like I walked around campus just like smiling at everybody and people would kind of look at me like, do I know you? Because I felt like this Mormon culture I came from was just like, you are a light on the hill and you're shining your light. And other people are like, just chill out. What is your deal?
I was this creepy woman smiling at me.
Yes. And so, I'm trying to think if I'm making sure I'm at the right place in my story. But that was a great experience. I loved I loved being outside of the bubble and felt like I was just learning so much. In one class, I took this Victorian literature class, which Victorian literature is always my favorite. That's what I ended up studying the most. But we read a Sherlock Holmes book, an Arthur Conan Doyle book called A Study in Scarlet. And
I know where this is going.
And I'd never heard of it, right? Didn't know that there was a quote unquote anti-Mormon Sherlock Holmes novel. And I started reading the book without any context and went, oh my goodness, what is this? So it's a book. It's been years since I've read it, but it's about the Danites. It's about violence. It's about polygamy. And a lot of it is very like alarmist, sensationalist stuff, but it is talking about real history, right? The Danites were real. We haven't
really covered the Danites on Mormon Stories much. Do you want to tell people in 30 seconds who the Danites were?
Yeah. So the Danites originated in Nauvoo as kind of a vigilante group protecting Joseph Smith. And over time, certain people have denied their existence, but as far as I can see, there is ample support. The Danites were real. What exactly they did, what does any vigilante group do that's trying to stay undercover? That's debatable. But the stories, we know they were, enacting violence. There's stories of people being hunted down, like leaving the Utah Territory. There's a lot of scary stuff. And so much so that, Arthur Conan Doyle over in Great Britain and all over Britain at the time in the 1890s are writing about Mormons, stories, stuff that was happening in the Utah Territory because it was the Wild West mixed with all this polygamy stuff. So picture this little, I don't know, like 22, 23-year-old Mormon woman going, I'm a fish out of water, and all these people are telling me, we're having full class discussions about Joseph Smith polygamy. All of my non-Mormon peers know all of this stuff. And they're looking at me like, wait, didn't you say you're a Mormon? But wait, you don't know any of this stuff? Mm-hmm. And I said, well, I've been to Mountain Meadow, but I didn't really know. No, I didn't really know any of this stuff. And
around what year were you at UNLV? What year?
This would have been, let me think, 2010, let's say 2010, 2011, probably. So yeah, I just remember like being embarrassed. How do I not know this stuff? And everyone else looked embarrassed for me. The professor was like, "Are you okay?" Like, I didn't mean for this to be like, disrespectful to your religion. And I put on a brave face. Yeah, it's fine. Inside I was going like, I felt embarrassed of our history, and especially embarrassed that I didn't know about it. So that was really a strange experience. Looking around at all these people that had no personal investment in Mormonism and knew a ton about the history, and I didn't. And I'm a PhD student, so it just really doesn't look good, right?
Now, for some people, that's the beginning of a major faith crisis where they're like, the church hid this from me, the church lied to me, and now I'm going to have a faith crisis.
Yeah.
Did that happen with you or not?
I would call it I don't know if I'd call it a faith crisis. What happened is I went, you know what? There's answers to these problems, and I just need to educate myself. And so I went the fair Mormon route, apologetics. I remember there was a podcast on the Joseph Smith papers at the time, and I kind of felt like I would hear something new about Joseph Smith translation, and I would kind of go, okay. We were not talking about, I remember sharing my concerns with you, and it was very much, out in the world, they have these ideas. It was totally faithful perspective. I do remember listening to a Mormon Stories podcast on polygamy, and I thought, and the information was so good. And I also went, this is scary. I went I don't think I can do this, because what I could hear was people saying, what is the truth? And not sacrificing their integrity to try to fit into this box. And I was not ready for that. And I thought, okay, no, I need to stick to faithful sources, whatever those are. And that was hard to find. And I sort of stuffed it back into a box.
I remember you talking to me about it and laying in bed at night. And by this point, I've already built a mechanism, right? Where it's like, I had this autoresponder that if I heard something that didn't resonate with me, because I heard it on my mission all the time. I heard about the seer stone. I heard about the things she's talking about, and it was all anti-Mormon. I remember my companion and I just laughing. We're like, some serious stone. He put his head in a hat. That's the dumbest thing. I remember going, what are you talking about? And so then when Amanda's hearing this, I'm going, they're just taking it out of the context. They don't know what they're talking about.
Well, that's the golden phrase.
But then
taken out of context.
And then you double down and you go, I've had these, your mind, the cognitive dissonance kicks in and you double down on like, but I've had these experiences I can't deny. Yeah. And so they just quickly dismiss any facts or anything that could shake that. And so that's kind of, I think, where we left it.
Yeah. And that's true for me too. There was a few life altering, like that moment I talked about in the part 1 of this, of knowing that I was supposed to marry Shaye, which is still something that's so clear in my mind. I had experiences like that. And of course, because I framed them in the way, I had that experience because I'm a Mormon, right? Because I have the truthfulness of this gospel, I am having spiritual experiences. That was my frame of reference. And so to dabble in this history and the stuff that really disturbed that faith just felt like, neglecting and totally abandoning those experiences.
You feel a dark spirit, right? You feel a dark feeling. It's like, I'm not supposed to look at this. This is bad. But
yep, the fear of looking at it. So yeah, I doubled down. I remember listening to the Book of Mormon on my way back and forth from Las Vegas, because it's about not quite a 2-hour drive, about an 1.5-hour drive. And I remember I never really connected. So studying literature, and even the Bible is literature, I don't know, it just felt like it had a historicity and I know the Bible has problems as well, of course, but it has a literary value that ties into lots of literature after that. But then the Book of Mormon was this weird thing that even since I was a kid, I kind of it didn't resonate with me. It felt like, I wasn't sure why, but it felt made up or like, and I wouldn't have never said that out loud, but I thought there must be something wrong with me, because everyone's talking about, what is that Hebraic device where there's chiasmus. Yes. People talk about chiasmus and I'd be like, I don't think there's literary merit here, which I understand. Literary merit is not everything. But all these people would be talking about the Book of Mormon like it was this awe-inspiring work. And I would be thinking, I just read a book of poetry, by Real Gay that like feeds my spirit way more than this. But I still wasn't like coming to any conclusions. I was just kind of like, I must just not get this. There must be something wrong with me that I don't understand this. But I remember listening to the Book of Mormon and, I would feel that feeling of peace, right? I think some of it was familiarity. Some of it was, oh, that's teaching a good precept, So then I thought, well, there's some problems here, but at the end of the day, it's doing good, right? We're all like trying to do good. We're trying to follow God. And so I just sort of was able to maintain that neutrality, even though there was part of my faith that was damaged for sure. And I also had this intellectual life that was growing in this way, but it was like there was a chasm between the two, right? Like I continued to develop my ideas and learn, and then there was my faith, and that was in like a glass box over here. Like don't apply the intellectualism to this. It's dangerous. And plenty of voices around me were telling me, oh, no, don't do that. Those are the philosophies of men, right? So I did. I worked for a couple years. Just separate them. Yeah.
Okay. So you effectively managed your cognitive dissonance for a while.
Yes.
Both of you did.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And then we got busy having kids. So, right? I mean, isn't that really what it came down to?
So you did the in vitro fertilization thing at least 2 out of 3 times, right?
Yes.
Anything you want to say about that?
Oh, it was one of those times where I felt like, being an infertile woman is so awkward and so hard. People ask awkward questions, invasive questions. Mother's Day is really hard. And I feel like I was like, is the Lord punishing me? I was kind of not sure why it was happening. It didn't make sense to me, right? If I'm righteous, if I'm living the way I'm supposed to, I knew that everybody has challenges, right? But I just couldn't figure out, why am I having all these promptings that there's kids that are supposed to be here right now and I can't get pregnant. So yeah, that was devastating to me, honestly. It was something that just totally like blew up in my sense of reality. And that like, I almost felt like it was like a Mormon character of like, okay, this is how life goes. This is the trajectory that your life goes in. And then all of a sudden I had all these mom friends who were gracious and lovely, but they kind of looked at me like, oh, I don't know if we have anything in common anymore. And I'm this working woman. So then, a lot of people were assuming we didn't want kids, and that was painful too.
So like,
and
you work? Or,
yeah.
Well, what do you mean?
People would say to her like, oh, you work, like kind of like, why are you working? You shouldn't be working. Like not understanding that you're struggling to have kids in the first place, right?
Yeah.
So it's just,
and just little funny things. Like people always, I think this is normal, but people always, when other women meet me, they still ask, what does your husband do? And I think it's just so funny that that's a line of, like, whether a woman works or not, I feel like it's an interesting line of questioning. Like, what does your husband do? Like, so I don't know. It's interesting within the culture how that works. But
are you smiling, Margie? Because I ask people that sometimes.
Oh, no.
Oh,
no.
I try not to.
No, because I thought it would be so interesting to respond by saying, what is it that you're really asking?
Yeah, I know, right?
There's actually an episode we did with Julie Hanks called something like what questions no one ever asks my husband, basically.
Oh yeah,
right?
I remember that one.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, and I know people mean well. It's just one of those funny cultural things. But yeah, that alongside the pain of infertility was a lot. It was hard, and spiritually something that happened was I always prayed. Okay, let this be the month. That's the worst part about it. Like comes around every 28 days. So it's just like disappointment after disappointment. Oh. And I would pray and then I would feel peace. And then I would think, okay, this is the month it's going to happen. And so, and then it didn't. So it's sort of like, as a spiritual person, I built up all this scar tissue and I started to think, I don't think I know how to receive spiritual answers.
We even had loved ones say, I had a prompting that you're pregnant.
Yes.
And she wasn't, it's
yeah.
like
I have a spiritual experience. I know you're pregnant right now. Stuff like that would happen. And so I just felt full on confused because I'd never had that before. I'd had promptings and then, like, for example, marrying Shaye, that was a wonderful thing. It worked out great. And then I literally every month felt these promptings and they ended up not being real. And so then I just thought, oh, I am messed up. Like, I don't know how to receive spiritual guidance.
In high demand religions, if it all works as described, then the religion's awesome. If it doesn't work as described, then you're doing it wrong.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
The house wins either way, right? House always wins.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Yeah. There's that.
The Mormon quadrant.
Yeah. Where it's like, if you're a faithful member of the church and you're being blessed, it's because you're righteous. If you're not, you're being tested. If you're not a member, it's because it's the ways of the world. And if they're being blessed, they're not really being blessed. They think they're happy, but they're not, right? And that's just the world you live in, is that good things happen to you because you're Mormon, and bad things are happening, it's because the Lord is trying you. Everyone else is they're just extras in the set. It's just like, you ever watch the movie or the TV show Lost? You watch all these extras, these people walking around the island. You're like, who's that guy? That's what it's like being Mormon. All these other people around me who don't have what I have.
That analogy is great.
You're the center of the universe, right? It's like,
yeah. And so it took us 6 years, and then we did IVF. Thank goodness it worked the first time. And I got pregnant with our oldest, Emmeline. And then it was just pure relief. And then I loved motherhood. But then the moments where I didn't love motherhood, I felt kind of like a survivor's guilt. Like, I have friends that still have not been able to conceive. And so those moments of frustration as a mom or not having patience, I would think, what's wrong with me? Like, it took me 6 years to get this. And here I am frustrated that, this kid's not cooperating or whatever. So anyway, that's been really interesting. But yeah, then our second baby was kind of the cliche. Everyone told us, well, maybe once you get pregnant, you'll just naturally get pregnant. And I was like, that's cute. That's never going to happen to us. And then it did. Of course, we were thrilled.
So you just had a natural baby.
Natural baby.
Yeah.
The middle one, yeah.
Natural baby and fast. Right after I stopped nursing our baby. Our oldest daughter,
wow,
oldest child. And then after our second, again, we tried for quite a while. And so we did IVF again and had our youngest. And so that was a huge blessing. No twins. No. In fact, the second time they said, you can't even put in 2 embryos, just 1, which has been good for us. I don't think I'm a twin mom. I'm a single baby mom.
Does a twin mom exist, by the way?
I feel like some women manage it great.
Okay.
Anyway, our family's been perfect for us. And even the delay has been perfect. At the time, I didn't see that. At the time, I was stressed out. And, looking back, I would have told myself, just relax, it's going to be okay. But you don't know that at the time, right? Everyone's telling you it's going to be okay. And you think, you don't know. You don't know what's going to happen. So, that was a really interesting time. And during that time, I served in lots of young women callings. That was really interesting. I loved young women as a girl. Loved it. Loved girls' camp. Loved all the things. As a leader, not so much. Because I loved the girls, but I kept seeing things happening that were really not great for my feminist sensibilities, I should say. One of the wards we were in, the bishop came in during a meeting we were having, and I couldn't believe my ears, but he said, okay, ladies, I really need you to rally around such and such young woman. Her wardrobe is just really not okay. I'm even having a hard time controlling my thoughts around her.
Whoa.
And I remember all the women kind of went like, not a good look, Bishop, but I was like, are you kidding me? Like it really, anyway.
Yeah.
That was not great. And
so at that point, is that challenging your faith for you, or just annoying, or?
I would say so. I mean, I would say in like the haze of raising young kids, for me, I wasn't taking a lot of time to do like deep reflection.
Not a lot of time for
you're
that.
Just like, and even Sunday, you're like, awesome, everyone has shoes on, let's go.
You checked out the box. Right?
Yeah. And so I was more just like, I don't like this. And, and it was sort of like this voice in my head, like, people are going to think you're a feminist if you say this. Should I say it? Yes. Type of thing. So I saw it more as cultural or like an individual problem. Like, this bishop is weird. And then I would say later on, just kind of watching the social aspect of it, so much of what we did with these young women was social or very surface level. And I would say, like, what about like leadership skills for the girls? Or what about like a service project that doesn't involve babysitting, like something else? And I felt like the other leaders would look at me like, but why? There was like kind of a disconnect I felt with my sensibilities. I know there's many women in the church who, would identify as feminists or want these things for girls, but the wards I happened to be in, I saw really well-meaning women, but I felt like they were stifling these girls' growth. I didn't like that.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So more cracks. I can see, Amanda, cracks for you developing kind of at every stage of your Mormon journey.
Yep.
And some of that's because you were pursuing a career, which is not the Mormon way for women. You were having fertility challenges, which is not the average Mormon experience, and having a feminist awakening, pursuing academia, which is going to make you give you more exposure to the world, I say in quotes.
Yeah.
So you're on the path slope downwards as far as the decisions you're making. I'm saying that tongue in cheek with air quotes, but I mean, everything you're doing is good from my values now, but I can see from an Orthodox Mormon perspective, you're skating on thin ice. Is that fair to say? Although you probably didn't think of yourself that way, right?
No, I still felt like a really faithful person.
Yeah.
And I was able to create that divide. I felt like I had, in an academic and professional setting, and it's interesting how this showed up with LGBTQ allyship as well. On a cognitive level, I understood that and was able to enact the ethics of that. But my faith side was like, there's like I don't know how else to say it, but almost like a keep sweet, like the brethren know, and like, I just need to be humble, because the moment that my humility, the moment I become prideful, this is how I thought about it. In academia, these people are prideful and they feel like they know the answers to these things. If that runs away with my faith, then I'm in trouble. So it was be humble, be humble, be humble. which I still think is good, but I just think it was misplaced in that case.
I keep sweet is a great way to describe that.
Yeah. Because a lot of the patriarchy, I feel like, is very well-meaning, and there is a loving and protective element to it, which can be very confusing. But it was sort of that, the brethren know best. Just stay in your place. Don't step out of it, because it really is dangerous, and you'll drag, I would see, family members in these situations. I had an aunt who's really important in our lives now, but she kind of went through she was the first in our family to go through a faith transition. And I saw the way people talked about her, and it was that's something that really pulls at my heartstrings now. She's pulling her whole family down with her. And, she just had to get into her feminist, whatever. It's kind of around the ordained women movement. And that was I could see how painful that was for their family.
Yeah, I remember watching her aunt go through this and looking at her husband and thinking, like, this means you have to end this. Like, she broke her covenants, or, by not believing this, you're destroying a family. And I just go, I look at that now, I'm like, but it's just like how you thought in that world. Like, this is everything. When you get married, it's you, your spouse, and God, which now I look at it like that third component owns the institution owns this part of people's lives, and it's just it was really unfortunate to see that. But.
And I think our reaction might have been a little bit different. I remember stepping into a nuanced space of like reaching out to my aunt and saying, "Hey, I love you so much," and it wasn't that I was willing to say I agree with you, because I wasn't there yet, but it was. I remember at family gatherings watching my aunt and thinking, "Are you telling me this person doesn't have joy?" Because I could see so much joy and freedom in the way she was living her life.
A non-LDS person.
Yeah, who'd gone through a faith, a post-Mormon.
Okay, post-Mormon.
And everyone's telling you, oh, it's so lost, so sad, what she's going through. And then I would look at her in my direct experiences with her and say, no, this is someone who's evolved. So even though my faith was still doing its thing in the box, I was like, what they're saying about her is not true. So that was really interesting too.
Proximity. Yeah.
Well, Twain says travel is fatal to prejudice, and I think maybe he means exposure to other lifestyles, points of view, cultures, broadens your perspective.
Yeah. Yep. Totally agree.
Yeah. And it's so interesting that the Mormon church has almost like antibodies built in to combat broad-mindedness, liberal, perspectives, feminism, intellectual valuing of science and evidence and intellectuality. It's already built in, this idea of like, oh, you got to attack that stuff. You got to beat that stuff down. You got to keep sweet, because that stuff will cause you to lose your faith, right? All that stuff.
And the insularity, that built-in insularity being this, strategy to protect members from direct experiences, right? Of, the people we judge, basically, right? So harshly, literally being kind of a strategy.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
And the weapon that eternal families are, that's one thing.
Oh.
That what could be worth losing your family over, And so that's so scary. And looking at your little children, what's weird to me is I just remember when we were in the church, I was terrified always putting my kids down to bed at night. Like, I was just so scared something would happen, because I think I associated that with my faithfulness, even though I could see people around me who were totally faithful that were having bad things happen. It's ironic to me now that I have less of that fear having left the church. It's something that doesn't quite make sense to me, except for that I feel like there was so much causation with eternal families in the way things were described to me. Like, if you're faithful, you will be bound to each other forever.
You need not fear.
You need not fear as long as you're faithful. But then trying to do all the things perfectly, I don't think anybody can. And so then I would think, I don't know that's the level of scrupulosity. I don't think it quite is, but it's just eternal families. That's just like held over people's heads. Because you love your family, you love your children so much that you wouldn't look at anything intellectual to mess with that, right? Like, It's too much to risk.
Okay. So you end up having 3 children, and do you keep your career as you're doing that, or?
Yep. And you know, Shaye helped. We have family in town that helped. So I worked part-time until more recently, and have been full-time the last couple of years, which has been wonderful. I just love it. So yeah, it's been, I think there's a lot of ways to make that work, especially now. And working in higher ed, it's wonderfully like flexible. So I feel really grateful, to have found something I love to do so much that like really feeds me. So, cause I don't know that I would necessarily work on just like a have to basis. It's been like, I feel like this brings me joy and it keeps my intellectual mind, you know, alive. And it's just been a kind of a balancing act with the other things sometimes, but it's kind of life. So yeah, it's been good.
That is so brilliant. I mean, to hear you kind of say that, especially, you know, following the arc of your story and around kind of some of the other narratives we've been following, it's the joy that you're really connecting to, and it lights you up.
And more recently, it's been a safe space because the place that I work is inclusive of everybody. And, you know, there's people in the church that work there, people out of the church. But it's a place where students belong, right? It's a place where the marginalized are embraced. That's, you know, people can say what they want about the liberal arts. And I'm a person that believes that, you know, all sorts of different places in academic thought are helpful. But reading stories, literature, the reason why that resonates with me so much is it gives you all these perspectives within the human experience. And even though it's fiction, it's also true in a sense because you can tap into these experiences. So that's what it's been a really good fit for this stage of life we're in, to have the marginalized be embraced and the curiosity about all of these different elements in the human experience. So yeah, I love it.
I love that too.
So where does your Mormon journey go? We've talked about each of your careers. When does the next sort of like pillar of a moment in your story, what theme or topic or event kind of comes next, do you think?
I think there's probably 10 years we just were going through the the emotions of life, right? Raising kids and
little kids.
I think for me, one of the critical things in terms of looking at where my crack started happening was first with my mission was, you know, I'm being raised in the 90s where everything was about, you know, the church is growing. Nothing's going to stop this work from progressing. You know, we're the greatest generation. That was really hammered into us. And then going on my mission in the United States and Cincinnati and seeing these little branches and areas where it was just really suffering and not really strong. And I just thought, wow, like you think everyone would just be joining and accepting this message that we're sharing, and that if I bear my testimony strong enough that I could convert everyone, like you read in these stories and these faithful stories you hear in conference. But then what really started to surprise me was jumping into the social media boom, you know, where you're starting to see YouTube and Facebook and all these things taking off, and it gives you a proper scale of how big things really are. And so for me, seeing how many views we were getting filming these music videos, but then also seeing how little views our church was getting, you know, or you see a conference talk, or you'd see, you know, this is a prophet, seer, and revelator. This is the prophet, not for Mormonism, but for the whole world. And it was like, we were just getting these Utah-based views, you know, it was like, you know, in terms of numbers, like they weren't anything significant. It was interesting also just to see the church's marketing side of things, which I'd never been acquainted with before, where they reached out to us and other influencers at the time and asked for assistance on, like, you know, had kind of like this board, if you will, of ideas you could pitch and, you know, things you could do to help share the gospel, right? To hashtag like the world and all these things that we hear. And
let's slow down on that for just a second. Yeah. So you're saying, like, at some point the church looks around. Well, first of all, we had this conversation off recording. On the one hand, the fact that Thomas S. Monson or David Bednar or Dallin H. Oaks would not have nearly as many followers as, like, Lindsay, whatever her name is,
Lindsay Sterling,
or Lindsay Sterling, sure, or David Archuleta, or whatever, Donny Osmond. Or on the one hand, you would think, well, the brethren are not of this world. The world hates truth and goodness. So of course they're not going to have, of course the Mormon prophet's not going to have a lot of follows and likes. Forget the fact that there's supposed to be 16 million members. So he should have at least, I don't know, 12 million maybe. But forget that. Like, why aren't the Mormons following these guys? But that's another story. But on the one hand, you would, an Orthodox Mormon worldview would say, God stuff is not of this world, so we wouldn't expect any of the Mormon church leaders to have good numbers on social media. That's a feature, not a bug. But then on the other hand, like if Monson or Hinckley or Nelson, if they're prophets to the whole world, which we're taught that they are, if this is God's one and only true church that has almost as much money as God does and is supposed to be inspired, then you would think they would do better on social media, right? I think it is possible, this is a total segue, it is possible that more hours of Mormon stories content gets viewed each week than more hours of content on the LDS Church's own website. And I'm not flexing, I'm not bragging, but I think that's possible. And that's weird when you know the church has a couple $100 billion and that they value the people listening to them. Anyway, that's my little side rant.
Yeah, no.
Now pick up your story.
No, I mean, you're absolutely right, especially considering that they have money to really boost these videos and have them be seen by the whole world. And so, no, that was interesting for me. You know, one situation they filmed on the Jerusalem set where they, you know, in collaboration with the church for a nativity. And we also did the world's largest nativity that we were part of that had the piano guys, David Archuleta, and the baby.
Alex Boyer probably. Like,
yeah, he was in it. Yeah. Like
a
lot, any YouTube person or, you know, social media influencer that was Mormon was in that video. The baby Jesus was actually our second son, our son Hudson, who played
our older son, our second child. Yeah.
Sorry.
He was like 10 days old. His tiny baby.
Wow.
That was a little scary looking back that he was so little, but it was fun.
Yeah. So, but I mean, going back to what you're saying too, is you say you look at it both ways, like, oh, the church is supposed to be small because it's the world. But I don't feel like that was the message I was growing up with. The message was that the gospel is going to reach the four corners of the earth.
Consume everything.
Yes.
Consume all nations.
Why else would we be building temples everywhere, right? We're building temples, like President Hinckley's big thing was with that. And then the message started to shift. I feel like once you can see views and you can see, you know, everything's transparent, how many views you're getting, to we're not of the world. We never were meant to be, you know. And I don't know when that happened, but I swear it happened like in the 2010s, and it was just so fascinating. And I remember just going, "Gosh, for a message that is so important, so important. Like, if God created a business, is this a successful business?"
Yeah. So, a lot of us who have been doing social media for 18 years, let's just say, we hear about these moments where the church will call in a bunch of influencers and like have a meeting where, whether it's prominent women mommy bloggers or the tattooed Mormon, whatever her name is, or, you know, or like my friend Jared Hess, who helped with like the I'm a Mormon campaign. But you hear about these waves of the church trying to tap its most successful social media people to help the church figure out how to spread the message better.
But it was just interesting. It was just interesting to see like the business where I had in my mind, if you can imagine, like this skyscraper, like this unstoppable force. And then all of a sudden it kind of became very Utah. Like it was like, oh my gosh, everything's run out of this little, like this fake wall, you know. It's like it just wasn't as impressive when you see it.
What fake wall? What are you talking about? That wall behind you?
I'm sure we don't know what you mean.
Yeah. That's a sturdy. Touch the wall. That's a sturdy. Go touch it. That's a sturdy, real edifice. Go ahead and touch it.
Yeah, my goal.
We've never done this before.
My goal was to reveal what John's working with here, but this isn't real, guys. I thought all my life it was real. We almost walked out, but
it's a metaphor. I won't say what up. Okay.
Honestly, it was just so interesting just to see how the operations of things really work when you put it up close, right? You see it for what it is. There's a little bit of that feeling the Wizard of Oz, you pull the curtain and you go, what? Like, this is it, you know, so.
But it was more that the world was opening, right? Where you were looking at, say, even the reach of the piano guys and recognizing, oh, we've got Utah, this little place that our experience has told us is the center of the universe, but then it's not, right? I mean, isn't that kind of in essence part of what was happening?
Yeah. And, you know, other people might have different opinions of how they saw things with that, but I could tell you everyone I was raised with that went to Sunday school with me would tell you the same thing. Yeah.
Let me just testify. You're taught growing up in seminary, the scripture Daniel 2:44 and 45, that there's this vision of a stone being cut out of the mountain without hands.
Right.
And it's going to roll forth and literally consume all nations. There was a sociologist named Rodney Stark, who wasn't Mormon, that had predicted, I think in the 80s, that there'd be like 200 million Mormons like within 50 years. And so, and the church was advertising itself as the fastest growing major Christian religion in the world. So we're all, and they're showing these films of like temples dotting the globe, and it starts out slow and then it speeds up, and all of a sudden there's dots everywhere. And even in the missionary program in the 80s and 90s, we're going on these missions, and some missions are baptizing 1,000 people a month. And, you know, some missionaries are getting 40, 50 baptisms a month. And there's just this feeling like we're going to take over a lot. We've already kind of got Utah and Arizona and Idaho. We're going to keep sweeping the United States. We're going to kind of own Mexico and Latin America. The Philippines is coming, and then it's just going to sweep the world in preparation for the second coming of Jesus.
Yeah.
And so you would think with social media, it would just accelerate that exponential growth. And it's almost like, you know, the opposite happens.
Yeah.
And that's not what we were expecting.
You could see things as they really are. Like it just really revealed itself for me. So,
well, yeah. And that local colorism would be endearing, right? Like Utah's the place, and but then the way that it shuts people down from the world, you know, the world is to be feared, and this is where all the good, I don't know that they say all the goodness, right? But this is like the nexus of truth right here. It closes down so much experience and so much life and understanding for people. So that's the part that I mean, I do think Utah has a lot of goodness and good things about it, but you know, turning your back on everything else, that seems really problematic.
Well, just to make sure you don't allow yourself to be gaslit, I'll just end by saying this, that every year in General Conference, you're just waiting. Oh, it's 12 million. Oh, it's 14 million. Oh, it's 16 million. And so that, you know, and the church was really proud of publishing its statistics, but you kind of get to the last 5 or 7 years, and all of a sudden the church doesn't want to talk about its statistics too much. And then it takes out of the General Conference tradition the reading of statistics altogether. And then it starts changing the narrative. It was never about growth. We were always the salt of the earth. The scripture said it narrows the path, and few there be that find it. We were never meant to be a global church. And that's a bait and switch.
Yes.
It's 100% a bait and switch.
And honestly, I think they want people still to think that by building temples in areas where we know we don't have members. And so you just go, why are we building temples in areas where we know there aren't members to sustain and keep this thing going? And
I think Nemo said Austria, they're building a temple in Austria where there are like 400 members.
Yeah.
In the entire country. It's not even enough to fill a stake.
Yeah.
And they're building a temple. Anyway.
Yeah.
We digress.
Yeah. Anyway, it's super fascinating. But yeah, so those were some definitely foundational things for me. I mean, nothing that I would have said shook my testimony, but it certainly gave me a different perspective of scale, if you would. But
yeah. Okay, so as you start realizing the church is not on its game, doesn't have social media game, what is that? Where do things progress from there?
I think all these things we're talking about, that's what's so funny when you look back, you can look at pivotal parts of your life that you can't see at the time, right? When you look back. I think what really was eating me alive was just the fact that I'm getting older. You know, that I reached 30, and I remember thinking, by the time I'm 25, I won't experience gender incongruence, or these callings will happen by then. And then I'm 30, and then these callings aren't happening, and I think I still have gender dysphoria. I'm still not seeing these callings happen. That
you weren't called as bishop.
No.
So you're not on track for becoming an apostle.
No. And there was one point in my life where I started to think, like, this is probably 6 years ago, where I started to think, do I need to like go talk to my bishop about this? Or do I need to not about my patriarchal blessing, but about like, is there something in my life that I didn't get taken care of, or you know what I mean? It's like, or just like even the gender incongruence, which again, I still didn't have language for that. I thought like, did my dad misunderstand this? This is something, there's some thorn in my back that, and so I started to view that as a bad thing. And so the shame just kind of started to grow, where I'm going like I had two options. I'm like, I might get to the end of my life and go, I was a fraud. Like nothing happened because I couldn't measure up to the potential. And I just remember thinking like, when I'm old, you know, my parents won't be there to be disappointed in me. And, but I always thought about my spouse, you know, I thought about my wife, and I thought, you know, will she be disappointed? Like, will she think like, where did my husband, you know, go wrong, that he's not fulfilling this mission that his family so openly talked about and his patriarchal blessing talked about. And, so that got really heavy, and, that kind of led to a breaking point, that I don't know if you want to get into right now, but yeah. So I remember.
And when you say the things you weren't fulfilling, you weren't called as a bishop, you weren't called as a stake president. What were the things?
Well, what's so hard is it's never specific, right? Even sitting in the highest councils, what does that mean, right? You can go, well, no, they meant that in the next life, in the millennium, and you know, you start to create all these new stories that you hear
in heaven.
Yes, or you hear someone who died young, we go, oh, that was because of this, their patriarchal blessing. It's like you have to explain it away, right? Yeah. But that's so painful, especially when you're talking about your own life, because you go, there's always a part of you that you're wondering, did I disappoint God? Did somewhere along this line of living the gospel, I failed? And I remember just thinking like, maybe I'll still make it to the celestial kingdom, but someone else will fill that void, because many are called and few are chosen. But I was one of those who just didn't quite measure up. So someone else filled those shoes for me. But that's a painful thought. Oh. And it's so, I mean, you look at the plan of salvation in that way, and it's like, no one wants second place. I'm sorry. No one wants to go to the terrestrial kingdom.
That's hell.
Right. Because we say, well, everyone go where they want to go, but say that to a parent that their kids aren't living the gospel path, right? And so we tell ourselves that to feel better, that everyone will be happy, but what we're really saying is that's not me. But I had this blessing that's like, if these things weren't happening, that means there's something I am doing wrong. So I must not be following the Spirit enough. I must not be reading my scriptures enough. I must not be, I don't know. It's just so.
I thought it was because we didn't go to the temple a lot, but you didn't love going to the temple, right?
Yeah, I didn't openly tell her that, but
no, but I could.
I
knew.
It just.
I have a secret almost nobody does.
Yeah, I know.
Almost nobody I've ever interviewed on Mormon Stories says they love the temple. So almost no one. There might be a few, but
you're the first ever, Amanda. So.
Yeah, I felt a sense of relief. Like, okay, we came, we checked the box, and I would have spiritual, I would feel a sense of peace, or I think it's a space set apart for meditation in a way. So my experience tied in with that.
I've always thought how much that has to do with the fact that you just have gone through the session and you're like, finally, I don't know. Anyway,
it's over.
Relief that you're in the celestial room.
Anyway, so then I get to a point in my life where I'm feeling just overwhelmed, and I think by that time I had heard the word gender dysphoria, and it was something that like explained me, and I just remember like reading it and going, oh my gosh, this is like me. And at this point I still thought like I was one of the only people on this planet experiencing this. And we were on vacation in 2019.
It was right before COVID.
So yeah, we're talking like 6 months pre-lockdown.
Okay.
I just remember feeling really, it was like I was in one of the lowest lows I've been in a long time, just because it was just eating me alive, that I'm getting older, nothing's happening. I'm living a very average Mormon life, going through the motions. I thought, this is another one of those moments where I'm like, I should just talk to Amanda about this.
Well, and by now I know something's super wrong. I just have no idea what it is. And of course,
how are you experiencing it?
I'm experiencing it. There's
is depression
and avoidance. And I'm thinking, as we're prone to blame ourselves, something I'm doing, something's not right. Right. And it's not all the time, right? It kind of came in waves, but there was waves where I thought something is different, and I felt that with myself. I kind of started to feel really disconnected with myself. I think it's the stress of raising kids. You could probably attribute it to a lot of things. I just felt out of sync. I even remember feeling fake, like with myself. I remember praying by myself and thinking, why do I feel fake right now? For praying, it was really bizarre, but it was like I was going through these motions without stopping to like check in. Is this like heart-centered? Is this coming from me, or is this just like what I'm supposed to do? But yeah, we were in Laguna Beach, and that same aunt that I was talking about, the aunt that had left the church, I was talking to her about a campaign she'd been doing down in St. George to get pride flags all over the community. And people were, supporting the cause, paying in to have pride flags. And we were just having this just great open conversation. I was also talking to Shaye about how I'd been experiencing a lot of anxiety, and my aunt's wonderful, and she was just totally normalizing, well, medication is something you should look into. There's nothing that's wrong. A medical professional can help you if that's something that's good for you. And so I'm telling Shaye all this, and then I said something like, I just think it's so beautiful. My aunt Amber, she was saying, I told my mom, who's still super in the church, it's really about what do you think Jesus would do? Would Jesus look at queer children as children of God? And I just thought, that's so beautiful. Like, who has a problem with that? And I said to Shaye, I know you would never want to do this, but I think it's so cool. It would be so cool to put a pride flag in front of our house. And then, queer kids would know that they're safe at our house.
And I've been previously so protective of anything because I didn't want anyone to associate. Like, I still had this feeling that people would know this about me, even though people laugh and go, "There's no hint of you being in the queer community, right?" Stereotypically, right? So it was something where in the past, like not even long before that, our bishop got up and he was giving a lesson about. He was just talking about how if you have a gay son or daughter, do you attend the wedding? That question was asked. And I'm still living in the 90s in my mind, right? So I raised my hand and I'm like, absolutely not. We love them, but we don't condone the sin, and I just remember there was kind of silence in this room, and I remember looking around, just going like, am I wrong on this? And I think he had just read the book of
Greg Prince or
Apostle
Tom
Christopherson, yeah.
Book, yeah.
And something about that book I think really moved him, and it was such a nuanced idea.
So you were more LGBT phobic than your
absolutely
ward members.
Like, if anything, especially with if I saw someone transgender, I would quickly shut it down and be like, that's not good, because I that's how much I hated myself.
That's internalized transphobia.
Well, because if I showed any support, I would think that my facade would just crumble, and that you would see me for who I am. And I think it's so common.
And I remember you doing that with me, and I would say, Shaye, I was the one saying, this is absolutely valid experience. And so
it's like I could start to see that there was a category that I fit in, but I didn't want to claim it. I didn't want to say this is me, that this is the world's view. It's a as Elder Oak said not long ago, it's like a devilish distortion, right? It's like something that we're being confused. And I had no education. I've been living under a rock because I was horrified of who I was. I was so horrified, and
and to finish that story, to that bishop's credit, he became tearful in that.
Yeah.
The way you've described that.
Yeah, he said, we should support, because that shows
we should attend that gay wedding.
Yeah,
we should support our family.
And I remember feeling so horrible because I thought, how many people in that room may have had a gay son or daughter that I just completely threw under the bus, raising my hand, thinking in my little bubble of Southern Utah that these people don't exist. Not that I thought that, but it never occurs to you in church they exist, right? Like. And of course, not even giving myself credit. I just thought, like, what did I just do? And then I started to pull back layers of maybe some of this ideology that I had created over time. And that's what led up to this point of being on this vacation. And then just talking, Amanda saying to me, talking about your aunt, and then I remember being so relieved because there was something about that experience that I think is when I went and looked up gender dysphoria or whatever, I found out what it was. And I told Amanda, I said, do you remember when I told you I was suicidal as a kid? And she's like, yeah, you know, I remember you telling me that. And I never told her why.
Yeah.
And so I told her it was because since when I was a kid, I even framed it in a way to protect myself. When I was a kid, I experienced gender dysphoria. And Amanda, just like her reaction was just like, oh, wow, like surprised, but also like, she said something along the lines of, what did you say to me? I can't remember. You're like,
I asked you if you needed to transition.
yeah, she goes, oh my gosh, do you need to transition? And I'm like, what? Like, it never even dawned on my mind that would even be, I was just thinking, am I going to lose you too? Because I didn't get that from my family. I didn't get that reassurance. I was just so shocked at her response. And it was like that inner child in me for the first time felt like, you know, I could come out and just talk about something that was so traumatic and, but yet so protective. Because I didn't want her to think, and it was true, like it didn't affect my love for her. It didn't really change anything. I didn't think I needed to change anything. And so I just, hearing her providing a safe space for me, my wife, my person that I would do anything for and not want to lose her, reassure me that it's totally fine. But yet also like a bomb probably just went off in your mind. Like what is going on? Like, how does this fit into, all of a sudden you have this plan and how does this fit into that?
I'd never seen Shaye like this before. It was like, I could just hear like his heart is like this. And I was like, what is happening? And it was one of those moments where it felt like there was no air in the room. I was before you told me, and I was like, okay, I don't know what's happening, but like something is happening. Like this is a like before and after moment. I knew before you told me what it was. But yeah, it was definitely a sense of complete shock because we've always been close, right? It's not like we had this like co-parenting model. We had emotional intimacy in our marriage. We had good communication. We talked about our feelings. We talked about our our childhoods, etc. And so it was such a radical disjuncture for me. At that point, it was just like everything turned upside down. Like I thought, what do I know at all about anything I perceive? Because it was so unexpected. But yet it was so, the love and the bond was only increasing. So it was like, I felt like we were just bonded by this experience. In some ways, bonded by the trauma of it in some ways, which I can appreciate, but also the love that was so tangible. And so that made me excited, even though I was stunned. And I knew that I loved Shaye not just as the performance or provider or whatever. Like I knew that I loved Shaye as a person. So more information about who Shaye is couldn't be bad. Even though there was another part of me that was going, what? What is going on? It was like an intrinsic part of me knew this is the same person. Nothing has changed, but this is just more to the heart of who you are. So the rest of it was like technicality and education, like figure it out. But the core of it was strong. And no disrespect to anybody who has a different experience, because I know there are many couples that do not have that experience. It is a disjuncture in their relationship. Things change, and no knocking on that whatsoever, but that just wasn't my experience.
Yeah, because I can see that potentially being a lot to receive. And like your reaction of, do you need to transition? Like the most common reaction within a Mormon context that I would expect would be like, oh no, you're not doing this to me. You know what I mean? In your case, this cisgender spouse saying, oh no, we're not going here. And if you go there, we're done. That's maybe what I would guess might be the more common Mormon faithful response.
And what made it such a powerful catalyst, because earlier I was talking about this intellectual sector of my brain, right? Which was fully comfortable with transgender people are, you know, beautiful humans that deserve respect. But that did cross over into this faith zone. It was like, so it wasn't as convicted as it should have been, right? But I knew intellectually, why is this experience demonized, gender as a construct anyway? Like I had all this background in, it really started in feminism. But now when people study feminism, it really, for the most part, is gender theory. Because you can't, if you're just studying feminism and not masculinity, then you're getting a very skewed, in my view, a very skewed and problematic half of the equation. It like doesn't, you have to kind of look at the binary. So
deconstruct the binary.
Yeah.
The gender binary.
Unlearn. It's not just, I know a lot of women who, oh gosh, this is going to sound condescending, who fancy themselves feminists, and they are learning feminist principles, but what they are not able to do, because of all kinds of different things in their lives, is unlearn the binary. And if you can't unlearn, it's sort of like putting lipstick on a pig, right? There's this binary, and then you're like, let's empower women by doing this. But if you're not able to deconstruct and unlearn, like, okay, this problematic system, then it's limited and in some ways causes great harm. And I see that with a lot of feminists who are transexclusionary, you know, they're like, well, that's not a woman because this is how I define a woman. And that's where the culture war really gets complicated. And it is complex, right? I don't mean to just make it sound like it's this easy, this is an uncharted thing with we're experiencing with the binary. But
is there an important term here, intersectional feminism?
Yes.
Intersectionality?
Absolutely.
That doesn't just, because there's a way to be feminist, I'm guessing, and I identify as feminist, so like the world, you know, these terms have so much meaning, but I guess there's a way to be feminist that's very patriarchal because it's still very rigid. It's still very binary in terms of gender.
It
but
still
also
works
it's still,
within that system.
It could be neglecting racial differences and other sorts of differences that are all also crucial. Margaret?
Yeah, or people who have even less privilege are even more marginalized, right, than women right now.
Yeah. For me, the problem comes with who is being centered in the conversation and why. So even when feminists go, it's women. Women are the best. Women are the answer. Women can do things just as well as men, you know, then that mentality becomes problematic because it has to be at the expense of somebody else.
Oh, yeah. So is it like one lens, meaning the difference between it being one lens having the narrative, which is women, as opposed to like multiple lenses?
Yes.
Like we can see it from a lot of different points of view, a lot of different. Is that what you're kind of saying?
Yeah. If you say, I speak for this discursive group as a woman, this is my lived experience, therefore this is what feminism is. Well, then it's the opposite of intersectional, right? Because intersectional would be, what is it like to live as a Black woman?
Yes.
I will never know that. I will not know what it's like to live as an Indigenous woman. I will not know what it's like to live as a trans woman. I won't. And so if your feminism is based on your experience alone, then you are excluding and you're not intersecting, right, with all of these lived experiences. And because the gender binary is so complex, I think it comes at a great cost to do that. And it's limitedly helpful.
That's huge.
That's how I feel. Anyway.
That's huge.
I remember attending a presentation by a well-known feminist, and she ended by having all the women stand up and shout, "The future is female." And on the one hand, I kind of got, okay, female empowerment, but then I thought, whoa, like, it's not that I'm feeling threatened. It's just like, this feels very patriarchal. It's just flipping who's got the power. And that it felt like a stunted worldview that was still exclusionary. It's just flipping who gets excluded.
Yeah, I think it's nuanced because I don't know. There's so much thought about this, but for a lot of feminists, second wave feminism, right, which was tremendously useful and powerful, was kind of about taking the playbook from masculinity and patriarchy. I'm like totally reducing it right now, but taking that and saying, oh yeah, women can be in the boardroom, women can do this, this, and this, which is true. Of course we can. But it's limited in a sense, because if you are doing that to a certain degree, you're taking everything that's quote unquote feminine, all the things we code feminine, and you're kind of downgrading them a little bit. And so then if you have a queer, someone that's assigned male at birth that is wanting to usurp these feminine things, we still as a society have misogyny to say, actually no. Where if someone assigned female at birth like me wants to take on masculine characteristics, you might be like, well, yeah, she knows what she's doing. She's assertive. And it goes all kinds of different ways. It's situational, but I still see it as anything that's feminine can sometimes be downgraded and sometimes dismissed. And that's a problematic thing. If you're uplifting women, as long as they play by this playbook, then that's a problem too, because not women all want different things, right? We're not all the same.
And I loved your point about just watching who gets excluded, as you're talking. And I do find non-binary queer, oftentimes they are a population that because our language is so gendered and so many things have been made gendered, are oftentimes excluded.
Because when we're deconstructing the binary, we're still talking about it.
That's right.
Right? We're still, in a way, messing with this either or black and white thing, where it's never been that.
Yeah.
And even if the sort of cartoon version of that is here's female, here's male, it's never really been that. But then we have this thing in Western rhetoric where we do this either or thing, where really we have to find a way to talk about it as a spectrum, not just with sexuality, because that's real, also with gender expression and gender identity. And a lot of people, don't like that because it's really messy, but it's what's real in our world.
It's messy, or it's diverse. You know what I mean?
Exactly.
It's gorgeous.
Yeah, exactly.
It's just hard to sum up in 300 words.
Multifaceted.
You can't do it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I guess you had a semi-ideal coming out.
Yeah.
Is that right?
Well, what's funny too is I think some cases you hear stories of people coming out to say, "Hey, I'm transitioning." That's not something that even crossed my mind. And everyone's different, right? I don't represent. I represent an experience in the transgender community. I can't speak for everybody, but my intention of sharing this part with her was that it was killing me from within inside. And I thought I had to root this in order to be back on this trajectory of this mission that God had for me. So for me to speak with Amanda, that of course immediately put us into a place of, we have so many questions, and we're giving each other permission to look at this and try to understand this. And it was the most I can't explain to you how open and freeing that felt. Something I don't recall ever feeling. Because even when I was 11, talking to my parents, the message I got back was, "Yeah, we know, honey, that's totally normal. Don't worry about it. Let's not talk about it again." And I thought, okay, so it's normal. Everyone feels this way. And then I started to go, no, that's not. It's not normal.
Totally normal.
It's not the
Please
feeling.
never speak of this again.
Yeah, right.
It makes
right?
sense, right?
And again, I love my parents. They were doing the best they could with the time they're given. So anyway, so that started us down this path of asking questions. And it was so weird, and so often you hear in people's faith deconstruction, there's something that's so pivotal that allows you to be in a place of being neutral, where you can look at something and go, what is real? What is true? Whereas before, I had to always look at it from the lens of, how do I defend my belief of what I know? And so to be in the space of we just want to know what is true, what is the truth? Because of course, from Amanda's perspective, she's thinking, how does this work out in the eternities? What does this mean? Is he, everyone goes to the church because the church is that one place. I remember saying so many times in my life, you'd watch the news and go, look how confused the world is. But we are so lucky because we have the gospel that will answer these questions for us. And so of course, naturally what we did is we turned to the gospel, and that's where
it takes a hard left.
that's where I think there was so much shock and so.
Yeah. So you came out to me. It was a week before a conference, and
2019.
So it's like end of September-ish, maybe 2 weeks, 2 weeks before conference. And so I'm still in the place. I go into conference and I'm like, all right, you go to conference with a prayer in your heart and your prayers will be answered. You know, you'll find. So I fully thought there's something about this experience I haven't encountered, but it's there. The brethren have said something helpful. Okay, this is where I'm entering into this.
Because there's always an answer in conference if you pray and have an open mind, right?
If you pray, you'll have an answer. Yeah. And so then I was listening to, I remember like having a mixed experience, you know, hearing things that seemed helpful and then kind of just starting to go, there's a lot of fear in this, isn't there? Like, this isn't really peaceful right now. It was just kind of a vague sense of like, But then I'm listening to, it was Dallin H. Oaks' talk that was part of the women's session. And I can tell right out of the gate, I'm not shocked. He's talking about LGBTQ people. And the talk is about, it's about like loving others, but also obeying God's laws. And he's kind of doing this thing, you know, balancing the two throughout it. And I'm kind of nodding, like I'm listening to this, I'm like cleaning my house listening. And I'm kind of like, yeah, okay, he's talking about loving. That's good. That's good. Loving our queer brothers and sisters. Of course, he's not saying queer. People that have, that suffer from same-sex attraction or however he's phrasing it. And I'm like, okay, say they are saying we love these people. And then right in the last 10 seconds of his talk, 30 seconds, he's basically telling the women of the church, hey, quoting Spencer W. Kimball, we need you to not be like the women of the world. The success of this church relies on that, you being different from these women. And one of the ways in which, he's basically saying one of the ways in which you need to do that is by rejecting this movement. And I'm starting to go, I don't like this. And then in like one of the last lines, he says something like, we need to avoid or not fall into the devilish distortions that are associated with this movement. And even though he's sort of dropping that really incendiary term at the end, the entire time he's talking about the queer population. So I just kind of was stunned, like, wow, there's all this niceness in the rhetoric, and then boom, he drops that at the end. And I remember feeling all of a sudden like, it was sort of like the room spun, and I thought, I don't think that these leaders have any answers. And I just feel unsafe right now. This is not an answer to prayer. If anything, I can see that these leaders are mischaracterizing the person that I know best in the world. This is not a devilish distortion. They don't know what they're talking about, right? So all of a sudden it's like, uh-oh. So then that mistrust, I think, was the vacuum that caused us to kind of really start engaging, giving ourselves permission. Mm-hmm. We should probably trust ourselves enough. I don't know if I trust these guys. So maybe we should give ourselves permission to look at it. And then we did go to church clear through COVID, but I remember having mixed feelings about it.
Yes, since Amanda, I think, dove into a rough stone ruling, and she's saying things to me, and I'm reading. And I was actually listening to a lot of faithful things too. I was listening to Listen, Learn, and Love with Richard Ostler.
And that was pretty stunning because the story you heard over and over again, here we are going through this isolated experience because we're not talking to anybody else at this point about what we're going through. No one knows, not a soul. It's just Shaye and I trying to figure this out.
Yeah, it was strange for me to come across that podcast with Listen, Learn, and Love and see like, here's an individual that sees this as a problem, is talking openly about it, but it was so out of line with what the culture actually is, you know, and with what's being spoken at the pulpit. And that's where I had a ton of dissonance. And I don't know, you know, some people this works for them, but when these men I've been taught my whole life to revere as prophets, seers, and revelators who I trusted, that if they said to jump, I would say how high. You know, that I remember having a debate with a friend, you know, years prior to that, and he's just like, you know, I was trying to explain to him, like, it says that they can never lead you astray. How can you go against, you know, the doctrine? And he has this very nuanced view of it. And I'm going, no, this is what they teach. I could show you numerous quotes, a history of these men who, when they speak, you know, I was taught, and this is one thing that drives me crazy, is I was taught growing up that what is scripture, right? What is scripture? Well, we have the Book of Mormon, the Bible, but what else is scripture? When they speak in general conference, it is as though the Lord himself is speaking. These are men who are preparing months to talk about what the Lord has impressed upon their mind to speak to God's children. And instead, we're watching this rhetoric, going back to this, 70s and 80s and 90s, things that I'm just going, oh my gosh, no wonder people ended their lives. Like, no wonder. And I'm so glad I didn't see some of these talks, but it was just so jarring to all of a sudden have this perspective flip where I saw it from a different point of view. And what's even more painful is to hear people protect it, that they had to protect what I would look at as abuse and say, oh, they're just speaking as men. And I go, in the same sentence, they're saying this is what the Lord has told them to do, or the reversal of the 2015 policy, the children of LGBT parents not being able to be baptized, right? And it was 2019, is that?
So 2015, it was implemented.
Correct.
And then retracted.
Retracted, I think, 2019.
Yeah.
4 years later.
But then seeing the reasoning for that, hearing him say that their brethren all came in alignment and they knew that this was the will and the mind of the Lord. And then years later, hearing President Nelson, still as the prophet, say that they essentially had to convince the Lord to change his mind, and he did. So it was God's fault. And I just started going, like, does no one else see this? That's where I started to feel like, I talk about it in our video, but I felt like I was in the Truman Show. I'm like, what is going on? Like, did no one else just see that satellite just fall and hit the ground, and everyone just sweeps it up and pretends like they saw nothing? But then it started what other people started to, I started to see what other people view as being sacred. I started to view as his fear tactics, in some cases manipulation. And the scariest part of it all is I don't know that they even know that they're doing that. They're just doing what you've always done. And that could have been me. If I was in that position, I might just be seeing those things. But that's what was hard, where I started to see that it wasn't a very healthy place, especially if you're queer. And it's the same thing, like learning about, say, blacks in the priesthood. That was so fascinating to me, was like, we talked about, my whole life I was taught that, like, we weren't ready yet. It was the members' fault. It was the members' fault that we weren't ready yet. We weren't prepared. But then you go, well, hold on a minute. This message was coming from these leaders. Had they said, hey, let's give them the priesthood, everyone would have jumped in line, right? But because we revere and trust these men, that they'll never lead you astray. I don't know what else you call that. That's being led astray. Like, if that was you personally, that would have affected you personally. It was interesting talking to my dad even about that topic real quickly. My dad being on his mission in Brazil, and he says that, my dad, he's in his 80s and he's in Brazil or in Chile, and he has a general authority come out to the mission field. I think it may have been an apostle. I can't remember who it was. But he says, I said, Dad, what was taught about blacks then in the priesthood? And he goes, well, they told us not to even teach them unless they were asking to be taught.
Yeah.
So all of a sudden it goes.
Yeah, like in North Carolina, missionaries in the 80s in North Carolina, 70s, 80s, they were just told, don't teach black people unless they come to you.
Yes.
Yeah.
So it wasn't this narrative of like, they weren't ready for the priesthood. It was like, let's not even bother giving them the saving ordinances of anything. Let's not give them the peace and joy that comes from only living the gospel of Jesus Christ that can be found only in this church. It's like, let's just not even bother giving it to them. And so anyway, just things like that, where we could see this very human component of this, like, and of course, where it becomes personal, you start to go,
who else are they doing this to? Yeah. Like, what other communities are being marginalized? Yeah. And
yeah, it's like at the moment you're not centered in something, all of a sudden you can see all the cracks in the foundation, and everyone's like, that's just you, get over it. And that's one of the most top comments we get on our video is like, stop talking. And Amanda wrote a beautiful comment just saying, when you say that, what you're essentially saying is that you want to protect the institution over people's lived experiences. What's being said is creating real trauma and real harm. What you look at as being sacred is traumatic to other people, so
That's powerful. That's powerful. I love the part about, once you find yourself on the outside, like othered for whatever reason, where you're no longer in that box of, whatever, that all of a sudden you look around and you see, okay, who else? Who are all the other people who are being denied on some level?
And you have to give yourself so much grace, because you're like, I was doing that.
I was doing that.
I was doing that to all kinds of people, and I didn't know better. Or I was so comfortable in my privilege that I didn't look at it. Yeah. And so then then the task from where we sit becomes, how can I give other people the compassion that other people gave me? I remember saying things and people would look at me like, you don't know what you're talking about, but I'm going to give you compassion. And now that's our task.
Like your colleagues in grad school.
Oh yeah. And I wasn't, doing something discriminatory towards them per se, right? But I know for a fact, just showing up unconsciously through my life, I have done that to people. The kids I grew up with that weren't Mormon. My gay uncles who I adore.
Yeah.
One of which we lost to suicide when I was in high school, which was devastating. Definitely another moment I didn't talk about earlier that you just think, what is the point of this if we are not caring for each other? But some people just, it's like that Maya Angelou quote, when you know better, you do better. So yeah.
We've mentioned The Village and The Truman Show. I think The Wizard of Oz, like it's kind of like when Toto goes around the curtain and pulls the curtain back and sees that it's just an old man pulling levers. And then Dorothy sees it and says, wait a minute.
Yeah.
This isn't the Great Oz. This is just some old man pulling levers.
Yeah.
And you're hurting people.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so key to that realization, I'm kind of a broken record with this, is stories, right? Which is so much of what you do here is you are telling people stories. And that was something, hearing more and more queer Latter-day Saint stories, some on this podcast, some on Richard Oster's podcast. It was the same story over and over again with nuances, but you experiencing this, just the two of us, thinking, I thought there is no other couple on this planet that is experiencing what we're going through, which now I can fully laugh at. There's a lot of couples going through what we're going through. It might not be super common, but it's absolutely happening.
With not just faith crisis, but gender dysphoria too.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Yeah, just since releasing our video, it's been so
We've
fascinating.
been able to connect with
If you
several
had to
couples.
estimate how many couples have reached out to you, could you that are experiencing this within a Mormon context?
Probably about 10, a dozen.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and a
Yeah.
lot of people from other faiths going,
Yeah.
I was moved by your story. I come from a Catholic background or an evangelical, and it's just interesting how there's this commonality where people coming into self, realizing that they are, you're not crazy, and that people are experiencing this all over this world right now. And I kind of feel like the world is shifting in that way. I think what we call a faith crisis can be more healthily viewed as a faith expansion, something that we're all stepping into what I view as God and the love of God. But we're so threatened by that because we want to put God into a box and say, this is what God is. And that by not having that box, then it somehow loses meaning to people. But it's just, I don't know, it's just so fascinating. And that's really been the journey we've been on. So
Yeah. And it does feel like a crisis sometimes. It's that unlearning part for me that's the crisis, right? This, from having this very secure identity of, my ancestors settled Utah, and they were kept safe from those Indians that tried to disturb them, and looking at even things like that and going, okay, that's ridiculous, very wrong, very problematic. And so many other things, having love and revering the prophet Joseph Smith. And then, for us, it started with the things that are kind of, I don't want to say low-hanging fruit in a demeaning way, but the things that are widely shared, right, amongst post-Mormon populations. Like as COVID started and we stopped going to church, like everybody did, right? And then there was a lot of time for stillness. There was a lot of time for, what does this mean? And, watching church from home and having good experiences with our local leaders. We were not at all turned off by them. They weren't necessarily helpful with our particular situation, of course, because they don't have any training with gender identity or anything like that. But loving people and all that, but just having so much space to dive in. And at first it was things like the CES letter or things like that. And we were both of the mentality that, especially, I think you felt like this as well, but speaking for myself, Shaye's reading like, whoa, somebody posted this on Reddit. And I'm going, that sounds suspicious, you know.
I need to see the sources.
I need to see the sources. I need to see the, you know, it's the whole, this is taken out of context. And so I go, wow, this is disturbing is what it is. And I need to dive into this. And so that was a crazy part that felt like a crisis, because when I delve into the context, sometimes it was more nuanced, not ever any better. Especially the things that were the biggest shelf breakers for me that, you know, since I'd been in grad school had been polygamy, Joseph Smith translation. The more I read about that and, you know, primary sources, scholarship, I was interested in not conjecture. Just tell me what the facts are. And conjecture is super useful, right? We have to process it. So I think that's very useful. But I wanted to do that on my own. And so that was really a slow process. But then it's go ahead.
What were the most disturbing parts of Joseph Smith's polygamy for you?
Oh, where do I start?
If you don't mind.
Oh, no, I don't mind at all. It was, so for me, there are things that it's reasonable to infer happened, and there are things we know happened. So if we just stick to the things that we know happened, at best, if you're just going to give Joseph Smith a break, which I think is a bad idea, but let's say you're going to, he is going to young girls in vulnerable situations, working in his house, perhaps separated from their parents, and he is telling them, I have a revelation from God, and if you comply, you know, in the case of Helen Mar Kimball, for example, this is eternal blessings upon your family. And then, you know, apologists love to say, well, later in life, she was an advocate for polygamy. But if you read her writings, she's using language like sacrificial lamb, her mother's bleeding heart. And I'm like, okay, this is her testimony of polygamy. You're talking about women who their salvation rested upon adhering to this. So it was taking the thing that was most powerful. I saw Joseph Smith's story, problems, so many things. And then I was like, what about the wives? Let's look at their story. Like, what happens to these women after the martyrdom? What happens to them when they go to Utah, or when they run off and leave the church because they don't want to be part of this anymore? And it was tracing all of those threads. In Sacred Loneliness by Todd Compton was like a really deep dive for me. And of course, Lindsay Hansen Park's work in the Year of Polygamy podcast. I just remember pausing it and just sobbing, because it was so clear. Like, there's no way you put this back in the box. There was no part of my ethics and my integrity that could go on and say, this is okay. This is not a deal breaker. And it was devastating, because this, like, you know, when I was a kid, they had that Legacy movie, you know, and the character is based on Mary Elizabeth Leitner, right? And it's like this euphoria of pioneer. And I identified with that so much. And then you learn the history. And it is such an ugly underbelly to what we've been sold. And so that was a crisis. That part of it was a crisis to me, because it was so ugly and sad. And the women are heroes in my mind.
Yeah. It's like, I think
Victims.
Right.
They're
heroes.
They're survivors.
Yeah. It's like, it's funny how we're talking about these. Like, I look at these women, if they didn't accept it, then Joseph would have been destroyed by an angel with a flaming sword. And then those should be like, we should have statues of all these women who made the church move forward. You know, if we take his word for what happened, right? Yeah. Then of course there becomes the question, what about the women who didn't accept his offering?
Nancy Rigdon.
Yeah, exactly.
Those women are heroes too.
But you get to a point, you look at it all and you go, okay, I think the thing that really flips on the switch in your minds for a lot of people is you look at all this and you go, gosh, there's so much I have to jump through to make sense of this. But then you go, if this is true, this is how God worked through Joseph Smith, what does this say about the God I worship? Because you could see nothing but ego. It's worship me or else. And then it's like you get to this point where you start to realize, it was like this, I'll throw in another movie, ready? The Matrix. But you realize that God and the devil are the same person coming from the same source. Like, meaning that I suddenly realized that they're using both of these people, but I fear them both the same. I fear that if I don't step in line, the Lord is not bound to bless me. And, and we say he does it because he loves us, but it's like a loving God that would ask of these women, to make the sacrifice or to create a religion that happens to look like every other high control religion throughout the history of time with David Koresh and all these different people. You start to go like, this looks so similar. And then you get to a point where you stop fearing that. And that's where all of a sudden, like, the music turns off in your head and you go, you know what? If Jesus Christ came tomorrow, I wouldn't fear him. If it all turns out that this is all true, I would say, why did you make it so hard to believe? Why did you make it look like the same pattern? And if I was sent away for that reason, then to some degree, I'd feel like I was never worshiping God in the first place. Like, it just doesn't make sense to me that God could be anything but love. And that's kind of like where you get to this place of reclaiming your identity as you start to go, I just don't believe that's the case. And that's kind of what it was like for me. And that allowed me to suddenly just go open the drains and go, what else do I not know? And it's been so fascinating. Like, I then devoured a lot of your podcasts, like
Hans Mattson.
Hans Mattson. That was a big one for me. It's like hearing a man that's every bit sounds like a disciple of Christ, that he's not angry at the church and he's not yelling, throwing mud at it. He's just sharing his experience. And I'm going, here's a man who received the second anointing, who rubbed shoulders with these men and found himself in a similar spot that so many of us have. And
it's also a toolkit. I remember the podcast you did with Luna Lindsay Corbden. That was
non-binary.
Yes, they are amazing. That I felt like was a toolkit that I could use. And now when we still listen to conference. We listened this last October conference, and I feel very calm and able to go, oh, I see. There's that double bind again. Because I think when you're in it, it's so confusing and you feel like all these strings are being pulled. And so that was very, I had the rhetorical piece. I understood how that worked, but then there's very specific ways that you both laid out in those podcasts that were like a toolkit for me to unlearn. And there's so much though. I can see how historians, there's so much we're still learning about this rich history that's in some ways so fascinating and beautiful in a lot of ways. You look at the grit of the Mormon forebears and it's amazing. And then also it's just so sad that there's not full disclosure about what we can say for certain. And there's some things that for me are still big question marks, when people get caught up in, did Joseph have sexual relations with Helen Mar Kimball? And my answer to that is like, I don't know, but what we have documented is a deal breaker for me. Well, all these other things are obviously problematic and would not be okay, but what I was able to look at with facts, because this is my family's salvation we're talking about, right? I'm not like, kind of feel like sinning, kind of feel like deconstructing my faith. But that's you guys know, that's the
kind
attitude
feel like
people have.
Transition
Kind of feel like,
I'm just feeling it. I'm just sort of feeling it right now.
I'm going to throw out whatever privilege I have out the window just for fun, make life exciting. But.
No, for me, it's like every single thing I know how to do, I'm going to attack these truth claims with it. And there did come a point, I felt like there was maybe 2 years of that. And there kind of came a point where I was like, okay, like this is, the proof's in the pudding. Like there are so many specific questions, but you pile enough of those deal breakers and it's what Occam's razor, right? You kind of cut through it all and go, either we can find a million different explanations for all these things, or there's some serious fraud that's happened here and some serious mistelling of history for manipulative reasons and not just because we didn't know, right? I don't buy that for a second.
Yeah. I'm always bothered by the apologetic that there's no evidence that Joseph had sex with his wives, because for all the other prophets besides Joseph, when was sexual relations ever in question? And the Book of Mormon itself says that if polygamy is going to happen, it's to raise up a righteous seed. So this idea that we try and bracket Joseph Smith's polygamy as not being about sex, it literally is ridiculous.
Oh, well, and again, are you going to look at the Temple Lot case documents and say,
where Joseph's wives sign affidavits that they were Joseph's wife in very deed, right?
Yeah.
That they knew him
So
in the biblical
personally,
sense, right?
I totally believe that happened. But like, let's say, total benefit of the doubt, you're going to say that these women in the Victorian era are making this up, which is ludicrous. It's absolutely ludicrous, right? So there's I think there's 4 testimonies, or I might be getting that wrong. But that was comforting to me because it does become very convoluted, right? Just like, whoa, there's so many stories, there's so many wives, there's all these different problems. But yeah, I think that Lindsay Henson's work was also very healing. She starts off that podcast very like, all right, we're going to make sense of this. And I was right there with her. Okay, she knows something I don't know. We're going to make sense of this. And by the end, nope. There's no, putting the genie back in the bottle.
So it sounds like your shelves broke.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It was an interesting feeling because in some ways it was so incredibly necessary and healing just to start to accept myself, but also so scary and traumatic at the same time. Like, people talk about how painful a faith deconstruction is and the dark night of the soul. I mean, there's sometimes where I just thought like, oh my gosh, like would it have been easier just to stay in the Truman Show, just to have gone. But I'm like, no, it wasn't. Wouldn't change anything. But at the same time, it's not easy. It's not easy. And it's not something that the irony of all this is the very thing that I feared the most about myself ended up being the thing that freed me from a life of pain and suffering. And the only regret I have, if I were to have any, it's just I couldn't have figured this out sooner, right? But at the same time, I also look at this as part of my story. This is my journey and to becoming who I am and figuring that out.
That's one of the coolest quotes I've ever heard on Mormon Stories. The thing I feared most about myself, the thing I feared about myself most was the thing that freed me from a life of pain.
Yeah, it's been incredibly cathartic, but also just, it's just so crazy. It's funny because it's been 3 years and through this process and you still feel like your head's spinning sometimes, but
yeah, because you have this continuity of the person you were within the system. And it's just, not that everyone's always changing, right? But you have a storytelling mechanism for what's happening to you and where you're going. And then, it's kind of a slow fall down the rabbit hole, I guess. And some people do it fast. Wow. Like some people just like, well, guess I'm out. And for us, it was a little bit slower. But yeah, sometimes you do look up and go, wow. Or you look at, I look at pictures from 5 years ago, and I even found in my notes app on my phone something from early September 2019. So this would have been a couple weeks before Shaye came out to me, and I was writing down what I thought the Lord expected of me, and what was keeping me from fully embracing that. And it's like, it's just like strange looking back at yourself. And you have to, like I was saying earlier, you have to give yourself grace and go, okay, we're on a journey. It doesn't ever end. And you, that learning never ends, right? You always, and to a certain degree, I still feel totally open to new learning, new understanding, even about the church. I feel like the moment I close it off and go, nah, that doesn't feel good in my heart to do that, especially when it's still a part of, so many people in our lives. It's still like a huge part of what they care for. So yeah, it can be really complex.
Yeah, it certainly is. And that's why we could do 1,700 of these stories and people can't get enough, because every story is different and people just need constant affirmation or support or role models or, normalization.
The problem with religion is when it takes your spiritual experiences and then sells them back to you, as I've heard people say, is taking something that we're all worthy of and we're all experiencing all around this world. And I remember watching videos of people bearing their testimony and Muslim and all these different faiths across the world. And for the first time I could just go, wow, like they know just as I knew and what I believed in. But I find a lot of beauty in just looking at all that rather than judging it and just saying, perhaps that's God, but not living in the walls that keep me confined in that. And that was neat for us we went to Istanbul, went to a Muslim mosque like just a year ago. And it was so fascinating just to walk in there and normally to have a judgment saying, you know, you don't have it right and here's why. And I would tell a story about it, but I didn't. I just stood there and I thought, you know, that peace feels like just like the peace that we would feel in the temple, you know, and I think you can experience that in Mormonism as well. I don't think that's
and a healing thing for me about that same time, about a year ago, I taught a class way outside my area. It just happened to be the university I teach at needed someone to teach a world religion class. And I was like,
awesome.
My area is British literature, but I am willing and able to learn. And so, you know, I'm teaching these little freshman return missionaries, all these kids about Eastern religions is really what the class was. And I feel like when you are able to look at things from a more expansive viewpoint, you can see the building blocks of the world religions, which have to do with love and ethics, right? Respect for each other and wonder for things we can't explain. There's a lot of these things. And you look at the different world traditions and they all give us kind of different notes of this. But it's so beautiful to step back and from an unconclusive standpoint, see the goodness and open your eyes up to the world, right? Have that experience in Istanbul. And instead of going, you know, putting it in this Muslim box, going, wow, maybe God reaches out to people where they are. And then what we define as God, or others might say a higher power, or just being alive. You know, maybe we don't even want to put it outside of ourselves. Part of this human experience of that we have these moments of transcendence. And, you know, on the other side of the coin, there's great suffering in the world. I think when you're able to zoom out, then I can see the gifts of that Mormon upbringing as well that I intend to take with me. And I don't think you can try to escape the Mormon diaspora after leaving the church, but I think the thing that makes more sense to me is really just embodying the good characteristics, because though the community aspect can be very marginalizing for certain experiences, it can also, we've had both experiences, right? We've had the beauty of that. We have a 10-year-old, an 8-year-old, and a 4-year-old. How do you want to approach this? Our kids haven't shown an interest in going back to church, even though we made it clear to them that if they wanted to, we would support them. So yeah, it's kind of like a family adventure, going out into this uncharted wilderness together. But we just don't have a Liahona with us.
Or you have it inside.
We do. That's true. You're
learning to read your inside. Own Liahona inside you.
It's within.
The Liahona within.
Yeah.
Maybe that'll be how we title this episode. So I think we're kind of at the Reconstruction part, which is Margie's favorite part. I'm going to ask a quick question about Reconstruction, and then Margie, you may have some questions we'd love you to jump in and ask as well. When from what I've learned about the transgender experiences, you know, many of the common elements of that may include changing your name, changing your pronouns, social transition, sometimes medical procedures, you know, educating people about like what a dead name is and how it's not to be used, and educating people that you're never to ask about surgeries or body parts, that's off the table, and dealing with people using the wrong pronouns and dead naming you. And like, that's all really important stuff. And it's all kind of stereotypical parts of many people's transgender experiences. What to me seems slightly unique about your experience is, so far, you know, I haven't heard you mention many, if any of those things. And that's not me violating what I just said. In other words, asking about things that we are not to be asking people. But you also said earlier on that your experience just represents your experience. And so if your story represents an approach of a transgender experience that maybe isn't typical, but is still valid, and it's a different type, I'm really interested in letting people know about a different way. Because some will go, what's the point? Like, what's the point? If you're not going to go through all those changes, why'd you even need to come out? You're not even super changed, some might say. Like, why'd you even bother? Like, what are you doing? You know, and I hope that's not disrespectful. I'm trying to articulate questions that maybe some of our listeners might be asking.
First of all, I'm offended that you don't think I look like I'm different. But, yeah. No, it's funny. I'm a toddler in this, like just like I was saying earlier, just figuring out who I am, like after so many years of knowing who I am and being told who I am. You know, so often in life we say life's about figuring out, you know, becoming who you are, right? Figure out who you are. I think a lot of it is undoing all the things that you know you're not. You know, it's taking away all the things you're not. So as I've been deconstructing and as I've been going through therapy, you know, as a result of this trauma, I'm in that process. But as far as, you know, I can't speak for all the community, and I bet you there are so many people just like me that don't talk about it. Yeah. Because their life simply works for whatever reasons, and that's just as valid, right? And I thought, you know what? I don't know how things are going to be in the future, but I'm totally fine with decentering myself. And if people want to judge me and think what they want, I don't really care, because I want to show that people like me do exist, and it's hard to know exactly what the future entails, but there are certain things that it's so funny because the church had just changed their handbook on this, but about taking hormone replacement therapy as a way to help alleviate dysphoria. I've been doing that for about a year, and it's helped a lot, you know, and instantly I just realized like how much I do not like testosterone. I don't like it, you know, and that's just something that for now that's working for me. While other people want to go through more, you know, say surgeries or their presentation. But what's funny about the story too is Amanda's actually, she's probably more affirming than I've been of myself. And that's just because I've had so many years of shame and deconstructing and all that. But
yeah, people's knee-jerk reaction is usually like, are you okay? Like, is this okay? Or from strangers. So are you guys going to stay together? Like, do you love each other as friends or like as husband and wife? You know, I'm like, no, I love Shaye as my partner, my lover. And I definitely feel totally open to whatever Shaye would feel most comfortable doing. So that's definitely given me a sense of peace, and I think for you too.
Yeah. It's hard to know. I haven't written that part of my story yet. So
yeah.
I know. I mean, for me, releasing this video was like, that was something that I never could imagine doing. You know, I never could imagine telling the world after being shut down by a few about my lived experience, and then to do that, and you go, oh my gosh. And now here we are. We're in Mormon Stories, and I'm saying this again, and other people will hear this. So I don't know. We'll have to see where this takes me, and you know, maybe that's the next big thing. I could never imagine, you know, actually transitioning, or, you know, I just don't know. I don't, yeah. And I don't think it makes anyone less valid or more valid it's just, that's for them to figure out. And so.
Yeah. The term transgender, I think people would define it in different ways, you know, within some nuance, but, more and more in an academic or theory setting, it is anybody who really experiences gender incongruence to the point that they would identify or feel more comfortable in another gender. And so but that's not what we see, right? If you were to look in our media, we see people who are, you know, sometimes not necessarily jumping to the other end of the binary. There's lots of shades and lots of expression in between that, which is beautiful. But yeah,
does that answer your question?
Well, and I did not, first of all, I didn't know you before. It was the first time I met you. So I actually wasn't making a comment on your appearance.
I was just teasing you.
I know. But I don't know what you look like before. Yeah. But I know you were teasing me.
Yeah.
I look the same.
You do?
Yeah. Well, no.
You think you do?
I don't know. I may have lost some weight.
You definitely look different. Yeah.
You think he looks different?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. In good ways.
Yeah. Okay. I don't know what you're referring to. Like I shaved a little bit. So no, I think hormone therapy has been really helpful for me, just mentally and
Yeah. I'm so glad. I'm so glad that you have found amidst exploring and discovering some things already that are making you feel more at home.
Yeah.
With yourself.
Yeah. No, thank you.
I love your framing too. What I'm hearing a lot is like that idea of living the question, which is such an interesting idea coming from Mormonism that has an answer for everything, and so I just think that's such I don't know, it's a very alive place to be. It feels like to me, it brings, I think, its own, what would I say, like myriad of feelings on like some probably uncomfortable, some really exciting, and kind of holding that whole spectrum. But another thing I was just thinking about when you were talking is just this idea of embracing change, embracing this idea of journey, as opposed to viewing ourselves as static. And I think we do that a lot of times to ourselves, just human being wise, this idea of our look or our sexuality or how we think or how we, there can be this surprise that we change, which I think is such an interesting thought when most things that are alive that we live with change, like seasons and, the things that they all change, and we have this expectation that they change. But then for human beings, it's like, and so I just was thinking like how beautiful that is, this idea that, what if we all held ourselves that way, that we expect ourselves to kind of change and evolve in all these ways. And the thing that actually would feel odd would be not to.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
because I think that's where suffering is, right? It's when we resist and we're not willing to move with the tide that moves in and out. And so that's certainly been something we're trying to be more in alignment with. It's just trying to be present in the here and now and trying to experience every day as a gift. And in many ways, the greatest gift of all this has just been seeing beauty in the world in a way that we never have before, seeing people for who they are and just simply feeling love for these people with no conditions. As long as you're not hurting someone else, who am I to tell you what's best for you? And I think that's where we find God. I really do. I think that sentence that God is love sounded so hippie to me a few years ago. And now I'm like, how could God be anything but that? Because then anything but that would be a God with an ego that gets really jealous and has commandments, and he makes it really confusing and changes his mind from apostle to apostle. And, it just gets really complicated. So,
What are the surprising, I'm curious about, oftentimes clearly we have been conditioned to view leaving and what people who leave, how they experience life and, who they are as people. But for you, what surprises you most? Is there anything like that surprises you or is, unanticipated about being where you are now?
Oh, surprises.
I think for me, it's just this concept of experiencing heaven right now, that we are living in the eternal now. Right now is eternal life. Where are you going? This idea that we're going somewhere is a sure way to rob you of the gift of now. And I think there's so much value and beauty that you find in the Eastern tradition that teaches us these things, that you are experiencing eternal life. And it was interesting. We had a comment saying, at the end of our video, Amanda says, maybe the point of all this is to experience heaven right now. And we got a comment that says, that's the biggest lie that the devil would tell you. And I think, gosh, if there is a devil, he'd want you to think that hell is right now.
I think they said, that's the most beautiful, like devilish, whatever it was so like, you just put beauty in the devil's mouth or something. Yeah. And I was like, oh, I'm sad for you that you would think that's the devil. That's telling you to, live, this experience right now with that amount of profundity.
Yeah. So I don't know if that answers that question, but just seeing that And we don't always do it. And I think it's also the point of life is you
have
know,
ups and downs.
Yeah, I had a great brother who studied philosophy at BYU and Mormon apologetics, and in the process realized that our faith crumbled under the same logic. But he says to me, he goes, life is like an EKG machine. It's like, if it's straight, what does that mean? It means you're dead. It's supposed to be up and down. That's how you experience. You can't have heaven if you don't have the challenges to give you the contrast. And so just really appreciating this gift that we call life has been probably one of the most profound gifts, I think, certainly from this deconstruction for me. But
yeah, unless that's like a very spacious idea, so I hate to like constrict it again, but surprised at how okay it is to be the bad guy for some people. I embracing that. It sounds so funny, but coming from this, experiencing myself as the person with good intentions that is not trying to hurt anybody, that this is my life.
And even
up until
people
this point.
Pleasing, right?
Yes.
A former people pleaser.
Yes. If people thought I was trying to hurt people, it was like, how dare you misunderstand me? And now, you have to let go of that, because them living their life as they have it planned out for them is contingent upon them misunderstanding you. Mm-hmm. They have to. Or they have to look at it differently. And so that's been really freeing to be like, I will be the bad guy for you. And not that I have a choice, but that's been surprising. Another surprise, I have to wonder how many like women who, or people in general that find themselves in the situation where we are, right? Where you're sharing this part of you with me later in life, we're in our mid-30s. Because I think the question we get in our video a lot is like, well, what about the wife? Like, what about like if Shaye were to transition, which as he made clear is not something, in my mind is totally on the table. Shaye is not necessarily saying that. It's been a surprise to me how I have always experienced myself straight, right? And it's sort of like realizing that I am in love with Shaye as a person, and that
that makes you in some way not totally straight.
Right. I guess.
I'm not trying to put words in your...
No, it does. And still like, would I identify as bisexual? Not necessarily, but it sort of doesn't matter. And then I just have to kind of wonder.
Definitely pansexual.
I guess. Yeah. Call it whatever you want. No, it's fine. And labels are helpful because they give us a sense of community.
And language.
They give us language. And so I don't think that's something I would have come upon had I not been in this situation, right? But recognizing that's been a very peaceful situation as well, to recognize I am in love with this person.
Who was always this person.
Right? And, however that works, it works. You just, you embrace that. And I don't expect people to understand that. I don't know that people would come to that unless they were in a situation of, okay, what is this? Because your partner has gender incongruence, you're going to go, nope, too weird, peace out. Like that just wasn't, that wasn't it for me. And I just see it as, I feel really grateful because it just happens to be the right decision for me as well. It's not just, I feel like sometimes people have framed it like, wow, Shaye, you're lucky to have a supportive wife. And I'm like, I'm lucky to have Shaye.
Yeah.
Like, queer people are amazing.
I think that's such a good point.
People who haven't figured that out yet, they don't get it. Like it's
like a messaging around a burden kind of, or like, wow, how magnanimous, as opposed to like, oh, I don't think actually you're connecting with what's happening.
Right.
Yeah.
And I don't want to sugarcoat, like, I think anytime someone's going through something heavy and difficult, dealing with trauma, there is a caretaker element of that. Of course, you care for the people that you love, you nourish them. And that's been a journey for me of, experiencing myself as a sensitive, like empathic person or whatever, and finding a way to transmute that. And instead of making that my burden, being able to hold space for that. I always thought that was such a hippie like term when people say hold space, but it's sort of like, I honor you. I honor this experience that you're having. Yeah. And yet I can choose a different experience. And this isn't just with Shaye, but just in relationships in general. People go through hard things, and sometimes we need to be right there in the trenches with them. sometimes we need to hold space and support and take care of ourselves as well.
Yeah.
And obviously that's something that's it's an ever evolving story, but I wanted to explain, because I think it's something that, unless you've been in the situation, I'm sure it works differently for everybody, but that's where I feel very solid in the future. And it's sort of like, we're here to play. And so whatever Shaye is wanting to express himself, I've basically had she, her pronouns in my head for a long time, but this is where we are. And I love Shaye, however you want to show up. So
I love that piece of like, by Shaye unlocking and kind of bringing these pieces to the forefront and living kind of more, what would you say, authentically or wholly, like integrated or whatever, that it has unlocked something in you too, a love in you and parts of you that you wouldn't have known actually had Shaye not done that.
Yeah. It gives life an immediacy. You know that feeling when you go to a funeral and you're like, whoa, that other stuff I've been worrying about, probably not that big of a deal. Like,
I think Amanda's struggled with the most with this is I've changed my name from Shaye to Shaye. So that's been really hard.
Dave, not everyone understands your sense of humor, okay?
I'm making the joke that my name, it goes
your name
either
is
way.
gender neutral.
Yeah.
So that part, that's pretty nice.
Oh, what else was I going to ask? Oh, I wanted to ask each of you, and not in a grand, like in the grand scheme of like healing, but in small ways of kind of showing up, daily moments, simple moments, what healing looks like for you right now.
You can go first.
Okay, because I have an answer. So on a spiritual level, meditation has been amazing. I feel like I've had a lot of integration with that. Just learning to trust myself, because sometimes I don't know what to make of my spiritual experiences in Mormonism, but I still have them now. But then there's so many other things, creative outlets, honestly, just like baking and making things and doing things with my kids and just really trying to embrace the seasons. Those things look like healing because they help pull me out of the mental spirals I can sometimes have. It's just present, right? It's just here right now. We're going to celebrate this moment.
Yeah, it's very mindful.
That's been healing. Educating myself about the transgender experience, being friends with other trans women who inspire me, just like the cis women that I'm friends with, you know, seeing this experience in all of its nuance and just embracing that. That's been huge. What about you, babe?
I think for me, just really focusing on loving this part of who I am. And just, it's like I imagine in my mind, it's just hugging that younger self and saying, hey, it's okay. You know, and just, I had such a powerful experience the first time I went to Encircle. And it was just frightening for me to do that. Like, that's just how sheltered my mind was. But just seeing these pictures and just crying and going like, this is, we have it all wrong. We have it all backwards. And that's been so profound for me. So
one last question from me, and that was around earlier in the interview, you talked about this, what it felt like to kind of keep this piece or part of you locked away and kind of as holding your breath. So do you feel like you can breathe?
Yeah, it's actually, it's been so disorienting and freeing, and it's like a rebirth to life. You know what I mean? It's like I was watching this traumatic movie on a TV, and then I realized that was my trauma. And that's the part that it's hard, but I also, it's just so healing to have other people, as a result of us speaking out, just thank us and say, you know, I have a kid who's going through exactly what you're going through, and because you speaking up, you're saving lives. And, you know, if that's, if I'm going to hell because of this, or I'm getting some lower kingdom, or I've lost my temple covenants, I don't care. Send me to hell. So it's just been life-changing for sure. So.
I have at least two more questions that I want to throw in here. I'm going to start with maybe the less happy, harder one, so that we can end on the positive, most positive, happy, best one. Is that okay? So one of the things that has deeply saddened me, you know, so everybody, Mormon Stories has no political affiliation formally. I want Mormon Stories to be a place where everybody feels welcome. This isn't about partisanship. And I'm just going to say that when I saw, you know, my mom and dad watch Fox News religiously, and that's fine. But when I saw, you know, every political party has its talking points. And Democrats and Republicans and Libertarians, you know, they all have talking points. When I saw maybe a few years ago that it appeared as though the Republican Party was incorporating into its talking points the war on gender, you know, I'll just call it that, and how like that was going to become one of, you know, it's like Border Patrol, war on gender, you know what I mean? Yeah. And when I contrasted my understanding of the vulnerability of this population, of the complexity of this issue, of how deeply complex and painful and sometimes tragic, but also important in a matter of physical and mental health and life and death. When I think about the import of this topic and the way that it impacts lives, and then to see it be politicized by any party in a way that could be deleterious for the people experiencing it, my heart sunk to a new low for today's modern political discourse. But I just want to give you both a chance to address your thoughts or feelings around this very sacred issue being politicized.
Yeah. You know, I think this is an area where I had a lot of unlearning. I think the best way I could sum it up is that people fear what they don't understand, right? And if you can get people to fear something, they'll fight for it, they'll vote for it, they'll do anything they can to try to erase it, to ensure that you keep the privileged in power. And this doesn't just happen in religions, it happens in government, and it's something that we're seeing happen today. And you don't have to go back far in history where we can see, you know, not long ago, you look at Proposition 8, right? Everyone was worried. You watched, one of the most comical things I ever did was going on YouTube and go type in Proposition 8 commercials. It was like there was so much fear behind it. It was like something you'd watch on Saturday Night Live. It was like, are you for real? Like as if these people are hurting your standard of living, right? And so
they're attacking straight marriage, you know,
yes,
the war on marriage,
like,
right?
Yeah. And if I was to be God's prophet, I'll go ahead and prophesy for you. But in the future, we won't talk about this, and we'll blame it on the culture of the time. Mm-hmm. To say that's just how people were back then. And see, I'm not willing to wait for that. I don't. I'd rather just speak
Definitely
up now.
Not.
You can see it. So
through science, through theory, through a lot of things, we're teasing out all the complicated parts of this. There's treatment, there's awareness. And so you have this young generation where, you know, kids are coming out, and it's even in little conservative St. George. We see it all around us, and it scares a lot of people. And there's all this discourse about this, but it's all rooted in fear. And the thing that I would say, because it's probably a lot of your listeners, right? This stuff you have to look at. When you grow up in a heteronormative population, being a kind person that's walking through life with charity, right? Let's assume that about people. You have to look at this and be willing to relearn things. And so my admonition to people would be, have you ever met a trans person? Have you ever talked to a trans person? Have you ever asked them about their experiences? Because if you're listening to some, you know, fear-mongering talk show host who will remain unnamed, and that is your source of information, you are not at all understanding the humanity of the situation. And then I would also ask, who is being harmed? Who are trans people harming? Right? There are perceived threats. Where are they backed up? You know, with the public restroom issue or whatever. There's phobia around this. there's perceived threat. Where does the fact support that? If the fact supported it, then I think, we should look at the fact supporting that. I'm not aware of anything that supports that. It's really unfortunate that people won't just take time to try to understand instead of thinking they know better. But I think it attacks people's sense of stability with their own gender, is they feel insulted because it's disturbing their concept of their gender. But I think that's to be celebrated, because the more that we can just be freely who we are, that's a good thing for our society. And so you can fight it, you can demonize it, you can continue to marginalize these kids and adults, or you can just take a minute to listen to their stories, humanize it. These are real people. They're not an issue. They're real people. And we lose way too many of them. That's real.
And we can create language.
Yes.
I mean, language is created all the time and
yeah.
should be created in real time. Webster Dictionary
adds words
every year.
Oh, yeah.
So let's create new words, shall we, for the human experience? We can do that.
I love it.
Two English majors geeking out with each other.
There's a lot more where that came from.
That's right. Just you wait.
All right. Well, last question, and this may be touching on themes already expressed, but you talked about, Carolyn Pearson once told me God is love, and that's a theme you just shared as well. Not everyone's God may be love, but if there is going to be a God, that's the only God I'm interested in, is one where God is love. And when I think about the purest form of love, it's this idea of unconditional love. Now, of course, in some sense, there's no such thing as unconditional love, because everybody needs healthy boundaries. But within, bracketed by the core assumption that everyone needs healthy boundaries, I see unconditional love as one of the most powerful, transformative, beautiful things we can experience. So I'm just going to give you each a chance to talk about the extent to which you've experienced unconditional love from each other and how that's been for you. Because I think in some sense our biggest fear is that we're going to be rejected if we show if we show the person we love most who we really are. I think that's the greatest fear, that the person that we love most is going to reject who we really are. What's it been, if each of you will take turns to share what it's been like to either give or receive pure unconditional love?
It's been this process of discovering who I am, right? And as I have opened my heart and began to love myself, I began to love others in a way that I didn't know was possible. And I have a love for Amanda that has grown beyond, barriers that we both feel like it's just like, oh, wow, I didn't know life could have so much color. I didn't know. And the craziest part about all of it is it's so hard to understand what that feels like unless you've gone through a deconstruction like we have, where I look at it as a faith expansion, that I can look at the beauty that Mormonism provided for me and I can honor that, but also recognize that it served its purpose. And now I'm in this other space of expansion of being able to celebrate, life and not to have any buts after, like, I love you, but, or you shouldn't do this because of this, other than just to reduce it down to, if we lived the golden rule, if everyone treated each other how you wanted to be treated, it would solve all the world's problems. It really would. We make it so complicated, and that's where we lose God. We give God, we put God into a box and create God into ego and say, God is a jealous God and he worries about this, and this. And you go, that no longer resonates with me. That doesn't make any sense to me. And so that's just, I would describe that's how it's felt for me. And if I answered your question correctly.
So what I heard you say is the ability to give unconditional love starts with the ability to give yourself unconditional love. And once you've experienced that, then you're able to offer that to someone else.
Yes. Yes. Just to walk through this world, like to be at Disneyland and look at all these people and go, I have nothing to offer you more. Whereas before I did, you know, I had something that I had to give to you for you to be better like me, or to experience what it's like to be God's covenant people. But just to look at people and go, you're beautiful just the way you are. And just realize that there's so much I can learn from everybody, every walk of life. And there's almost like this feeling of like, when people have gone through this, there's like this feeling of awareness, of consciousness that people go through, where you just go, like the most beautiful words I heard someone say to me is that I see you. Because no one's ever said that to me before. The I see you. And I want to do that to others and say, I see you. See you, you know, it's okay, you know. And we've had a few of those comments, and that's meant so much to me. And I want to give that to others. And Amanda has been such a life saver for me. Like I can't even express into language how grateful I am that I was led to her, and that I have someone who's been there when I've been at some points in my life the most broken I ever could feel, and to just help me to see that there's nothing wrong with me. There's nothing wrong with me. And that's been such a process of healing and a love that that transcends all language. So,
let me just gather myself. Unconditional love. I feel like that's a term I've heard my whole life, you know? But I think the biggest thing I've realized is it's all about capacity. I think a lot of people, like, let's again give people the benefit of the doubt. I think people loving you where they're at, for some people, there's a lot of barriers to that. And I think there's a lot of people in our lives that love us for who they want us to be, and not who we are. And that's ever evolving. I don't mean to make it sound like it's some like conclusive thing, who we are. We're always changing. And so I've tried to see, that's so painful. It's painful to be loved for the function that you served within a broad story or an enmeshment. But I can recognize what Shaye said about it starts with yourself. The people that I perceive that love me for who they want me to be, love themselves for who they believe they are supposed to be. And so it's hard sometimes not to go, well, that's not unconditional love. And I want people who love me unconditionally. But I recognize it's about capacity. And that's the crazy thing that people tell you, oh, you leave the church, you lose everything. It's hilarious because the people you encounter are the opposite of that. Even so many people we've met that don't understand our experience, right? They've not lived this experience, especially Shaye's situation. They are so curious. They're just curious. They're just listening. And sometimes there's awkward conversations. Sometimes, all kinds of things happen. But they have a greater capacity to love, in my experience, a lot of times, because they aren't in fear about themselves as much. And so for me, unconditional love is about surrender, and I can see other people around me that are surrendering. Shaye has been an amazing force of unconditional love for me, and in some ways that are both touching and also frustrating, because your approach has always been, I could never be who I want to be if it would hurt you. And thankfully, you don't have to make that decision. But that has always been the commitment, that level of commitment, me before you commitment, which I reject because that's not, in our situation, is not necessary. In some marriages, it might be. In ours, it's not. But yeah, I try to see those moments of unconditional love, even with people that I perceive are really don't feel safe with us anymore. They might love us, but they fear us. And I see that unconditional love even in our local leaders, sometimes our neighbors. There's flashes. And even if it's just for a moment where someone will drop their guard and just send love instead of judgment. So I try to hold on to that because sometimes that's all you can hope for from people. It's all they have to give. And I've been trying to work on seeing that rather than thinking, these are safe people, these are unsafe people, because then my heart closes up again. So, yeah.
Beautiful. Well, Amanda and Shaye, Scott, on behalf of our listeners, on behalf of humanity, Margie and I can't thank you both enough for being willing to be vulnerable and courageous and to tell your story in front of what will ultimately be hundreds of thousands of people. And you've already done that, but you're doing it in more depth here than maybe you ever will. So thank you.
Yeah. Well, thank you for providing this platform for us to speak our truth and share our experience. So.
Yeah. Thank you for allowing us to witness you. It's been a real gift.
And thanks for everything you guys are doing. I mean, your work, I know it's got to be like the fact that you do this so often. But it's been invaluable, that voicing, when you really do feel so isolated and you have this community that, I mean, the internet's amazing because we can connect, but you realize you're not alone and that there's really good people out there that are going through something that you are, and that, it'll be okay. Yeah.
Beautiful. And if people want to follow your awesome work, it's the Great Scots on YouTube.
Yeah, if you want. Yeah, that's where our videos posted about our story. So if they want to see the short and condensed version and then watch it.
Yeah, now that you've watched the long version, you can see the short version.
No, the short's beautiful. It's powerful. It's so well done.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So it's Great Scots, YouTube. All right.
Yep.
Yep.
And the Piano Guys, YouTube.
Yeah, that's right.
All right. All right. Well, thanks. Thanks, Margie. So great to have you always. People love you as co-hosts. So
Oh, that's so
I
good
do
to know.
too.
Thank you.
yeah, I love you.
Yeah, I love you too.
All right, everyone. Be good to each other. Be kind to each other. If you want to support Mormon Stories, go to mormonstories.org. Click on the donate button. Become a monthly donor. Thanks to everyone who does support us. Follow us on all the social medias. Subscribe to us on all the social medias. Share this with everyone you can. Most importantly, just be good to each other and be kind to each other. And we'll see you all again soon on another episode of Mormon Stories Podcast. Take care.